Chapter 709. Looking at the charging 5,000 Tatar cavalry, the charging formation was in chaos. Then one after another the cavalry fell off their horses. One after another the strong war horses became ownerless. They stopped in front of their owners and lowered their heads as if saying, "Get up, I'm still waiting for you to lead me into battle." It's the mercenaries' muskets. Seeing this scene, Suhi reacted and his heart sank. Although he already knew this before the battle, Suhi was still shocked when he saw the power of the muskets. He calculated that this wave of attack alone killed about 1,000 cavalry. This greatly reduced the number of cavalry on both sides, making his advantage infinitely smaller. Kill. The remaining 4,000 Tatar cavalry finally broke through the blockade of the muskets with the help of the speed of the horses, allowing them to come within a mile of the Nuzan cavalry. Prepare the bows and arrows. Charge with me. Seeing that the enemy was seriously injured, Yella laughed and then reached out to block the strong bow hanging on his horse. He shouted and urged his horse to charge. The other 3,000 Nuzan cavalry soldiers who couldn't wait for a long time followed suit and took out their bows and arrows. They raised their bows and were ready to shoot at any time. Finally, the battle is about to begin. Suhi opened his eyes wide and stared at the scene in front of him. This was a good opportunity to observe the strength of the mercenaries' cavalry. After escaping from the muskets, he hoped that his Tatar cavalry could play a role in suppressing the mercenaries' cavalry. This was their only chance to turn the tables. Arrows shot from afar, close combat, sabers raised high, cavalry charged. After 1,000 cavalry were killed by the muskets, the Tatar cavalry's morale couldn't help but drop. Many people were terrified because they couldn't see where the enemy was and could die under the muskets of the enemy at any time. This made them think of the scene when they faced the Ming Army's Divine Machine Battalion. Who knew how many ancestors died under those hateful muskets? Now this scene fell on them. They really had a feeling that they couldn't resist. Fortunately, they finally rushed over. Now they were about to engage in a charging battle with the enemy cavalry. This was their strength. They hoped to turn the situation around in this battle. Similarly, the 4,000-strong Tatar cavalrymen started shooting at the Nuzan cavalrymen. From panic to calmness, from being beaten to fighting back with all their strength, the 4,000 Tatar cavalry perfectly displayed the word, elite. Both sides began to shoot at a distance of only 1 mile. Both sides' horses were galloping. Under the situation where each person could shoot at most 2 arrows, it was difficult to say who would win. As the arrows continued to fly about, the cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another. The war horses stopped charging and became ownerless. In just 2 waves of archery, both the Nuzan cavalry and the Tatar cavalry paid the price of hundreds of cavalry deaths. In the end, they switched to using bows and arrows to fight in close combat. Kill. The deputy commander of the Nuzan cavalry division, Lu Dai, took the lead and led her men into the formation of the Tatar cavalry like an arrow. As the commander, Yella led most of the cavalry to engage in guerrilla warfare. This was a tactic that had been discussed before. A cavalry couldn't be without a commander. Otherwise the army would be like a sheet of loose sand. Without a commander they would be defeated one by one. Deputy Commander Lu Dai killed his way in. Along with him were 1,000 Nuzan cavalry soldiers. They followed behind the deputy commander and waved their sharp sabers at the Tatar cavalry around them. In history, the Mongol cavalry was once the subordinate of the Nuzan cavalry. In the end, with their help, the Nuzan defeated the Ming Dynasty and established the Qing Dynasty. But that was something that would happen more than 100 years later. In this era, the Mongol cavalry was still the strongest cavalry in the world. The Nuzan cavalry was still nothing in their eyes. Reality also proved that the Tatar cavalry was indeed the elite of the Mongolian cavalry. Be it their fighting spirit or their skillful operation and performance, they were slightly stronger than the Nuzan cavalry. If it were not for the fact that the Nuzan cavalry's sabers were sharper and tougher, and if they did not learn the 3-to-3 strategy from Lung Feng, where every 3 horses could form a small fighting group and fight with the enemy, the Nuzan cavalry would not be able to win against the Tatar cavalry. Use the advantage of the saber to increase the speed of your chopping. Commander Yella, who was roaming around the periphery, saw that both sides were actually evenly matched. Because they had fewer people than the enemy's 1,000 cavalry, their losses were even greater. Finally, he couldn't sit still anymore and began to shout loudly to remind his subordinates. If they wanted to use the advantage of the saber, they needed to cut the enemy's saber in half and obtain the advantage of the weapon. With Yella's shout, the Nuzan cavalrymen seemed to have woken up from a dream. They increased the speed at which they swung their sabers, forcing their opponents to fight back. After several collisions, the results finally appeared. Many of the Tatar cavalrymen had cracks on their sabers, and some of them even broke in half. The saber suddenly breaking in half was undoubtedly fatal for the cavalry who were in the middle of a fight. When the same saber was chopped over, the enemy's saber had already stabbed into his heart. However, your saber did not even touch the enemy's clothes. What kind of result would that be? The advantage of the saber was brought into play. More and more Tatar cavalrymen were caught off guard. More and more Tatar cavalrymen were chopped off their horses. The situation on both sides was reversing. Charge! Right at this moment, another group of cavalrymen dressed entirely in black iron, and even their war horses were covered in black iron armor, suddenly charged out from the side. Although they didn't have many people, their momentum was astonishing. Their black clothes and black faces emitted a cold and powerful aura. Their bodies were impervious to swords and spears. When this group of 100 people entered the battlefield, they became the mouth of a giant beast that devoured people's lives. They killed the Tartar cavalry and no one could stop them. Is that the enemy, the black cavalry that young master spoke of? So he also quickly discovered the existence of the black cavalry. When he saw the other party's heroic performance and killing as if there was no one around, he couldn't help but gasp. He saw with his own eyes that at least a few sabers had hacked at the enemy's black armor. However, apart from producing some weak sparks, they were unable to cause any damage. On the contrary, the Tatar cavalry that attacked were continuously killed by the Haiki cavalry. In just a short while, the Haiki cavalry had killed over 100 elite Tatar cavalry. The appearance of the black cavalry seemed to have blown the horn of the enemy's counterattack. Several thousand cavalrymen rushed out of the southern forest. They were the troops of Lu Jua of the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment. 2,000 men of this regiment were thrown into the battlefield. They appeared like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. It was as if a steel knife had stabbed into the side of the Tartar cavalrymen and caught them unprepared. Charge, charge with me. Seeing the mercenaries that were lying in ambush in the southern forest charging out, Suhi knew that there was no need to wait any longer. With a loud shout, he urged his horse to charge out. Suhi's horsemanship was indeed very good. His entire body was bent over the side of the horse's back. This way, not only could he reduce the resistance of the horse's advance, but more importantly, he could avoid the bullets to the greatest extent. In the southern forest, Tiger's Mane and 10 battalions of independent soldiers were already prepared to open fire. But facing the superb horsemanship of the Tatar cavalry, they had a feeling that they did not know where to start. Seeing that the Tatar cavalry had already broken through the blockade in front of them, many of the soldiers could not help but shout, "Commander, let's shoot the horses." No, young master said that we should try our best not to harm the horses. Tiger's Mane shook his head affirmatively. Then he pulled out his saber and said decisively, "Everyone listen to my order. Leave 2 musket battalions to suppress the main force of the Tatar army. The rest of you, get on your horses and charge with me." "Yes." After receiving the order, the 3,000 soldiers of the independent regiment let out a roar in unison. They shouted and got on their horses, pulled out their sabers and charged towards the battlefield from the southern forest. Bullets whistled past his ears, scaring Suhi so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. But when he turned around and saw that the majority of the cavalry was not affected by the muskets, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. It seemed that the enemy's muskets were not omnipotent. As long as they dodged well, they could still be safe. This result also increased Suhi's confidence in winning. Leading the 5,000 elite Tatar cavalry, their momentum became stronger and their charging speed also became faster. On the main battlefield, because Yang Qindong led 100 shadow cavalry to join in at the right time, the Tatar cavalry had been separated and they began to encircle and annihilate them. Suhi had no choice but to join in the battle. However, even with the addition of 2,000 cavalrymen from the 2nd Regiment and 3,000 cavalrymen from the Independent Regiment, they were still unable to turn the situation around. On the contrary, the addition of 5,000 cavalrymen was like adding fuel to the fire. They were still tightly suppressed. Suhi watched as the main force of the mercenaries pressed forward with his appearance. His heart was faintly excited. He said to a bannerman beside him, "Quick, inform His Excellency. Ask him to immediately dispatch his troops and attack the main force of the mercenaries together with our army." After the bannerman complied, he used a special method to inform the 10,000 Tatar soldiers of Suhi's order. However, the scene that Suhi was looking forward to did not happen. On the contrary, the scene that he was worried about happened. Agador began to hesitate at this moment. He wanted to protect himself and did not rush forward with his main force. Chapter 710. My lord, General Suhi has made another request. A Chiliarch appeared beside Agar Dorji and reported anxiously. I know, but have you noticed that there are still figures moving in the southern forest? If I'm not wrong, those are the flintlock soldiers left behind by the mercenaries. They are waiting for us to appear. Agadorji said calmly. At the same time, he pointed to the depths of the southern forest, as if he had already seen through everything. Without knowing the details of the mercenaries, Agar Dorji would never put himself in danger. This was his cautiousness, but it was also a sign of cowardice and lack of confidence. Of course, even if he did not take the risk, it did not mean that he would not force others to take the risk. After he shifted his gaze away from the southern forest, he said to the Chiliarch beside him, Inform Gulang and Haruo that we are currently fighting with the mercenary army's main force here in the southern forest and have achieved certain results. It won't be long before there will be signs of a lack of troops. Ask them to seize the opportunity to counterattack. Whoever can reach the beginning city first will be rewarded with 10,000 taels of silver. Yes, Agar Dorji didn't want to take the risk himself, but he placed his hopes on his subordinates. Just as General Suhi thought, even his son was included in the plan. The messenger left after receiving the order. And just after the messenger passed the order, they didn't know that the mercenaries had begun to take action. They cut off the communication between the three parties at the right time, making it impossible for follow-up information to flow smoothly. This made this order the last one issued by Agar Dorji. The battle was still going on ahead. Suhi led the last 5,000 cavalrymen into the battlefield, but he still couldn't gain an overwhelming advantage. Instead, as the battle dragged on, the sharp and tough sabers in the hands of the mercenaries played an absolute role. More and more Tatar cavalrymen's sabers were broken, and their combat strength rapidly declined. The addition of the Independent Regiment and the 2nd Cavalry Regiment greatly relieved the pressure of the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment. In addition, the Black Cavalry led by Yang Qindong was invincible. The 100 of them forcibly fought with the momentum of a magnificent army. The death rate of the Tatar cavalrymen began to rise. Retreat. After chopping down one of the mercenary cavalrymen, Suhi was a little out of breath as he watched more and more of his companions fall off their horses and die. With no reinforcements appearing behind him, he knew that if this continued, all of his cavalrymen would die here. He believed that this was an opportunity. He also believed that the mercenaries did not have many soldiers left. Unfortunately, his abilities were limited, and the number of soldiers he could command was also limited. At this moment he could no longer see any hope of victory and could only choose to retreat. Pass down my order. All troops retreat. With reluctance and unwillingness, Suhi finally gave the order to retreat. Although he would have to sacrifice a lot of people, he couldn't care less at this moment. Once the order was given, military orders would be obeyed. The Tatar cavalry quickly broke away from the mercenaries and started to look for an opportunity to retreat. But the two sides were still entangled before, so how could one side retreat just because they wanted to? Riding on the white dragon, Yang Qindong had already killed countless enemy cavalrymen. Seeing that the enemies around him were getting fewer and fewer, he guessed the other party's intention and shouted, "Entangle them and kill as many as you can. Order the Independent Regiment soldiers in the forest to shoot people if they can. If they can't shoot people, then shoot horses. We must strive to inflict the greatest damage to the enemy." Beta Persei and the guards, who were responsible for protecting Yang Qindong's safety, received the military order and immediately rode away to convey it. After receiving the military order, the entire mercenary army entangled the Tatar cavalry with the momentum of an army. With a crushing momentum, they left behind nearly 1,000 cavalrymen in a very short period of time. Suhi was the first group of people to withdraw. On the way back, he naturally encountered the long-range attack of the 2 Independent Regiment firearms battalions that had long been prepared. This time they were not so lucky. Under the order to shoot people but not horses, many of the Tatar cavalrymen who were hiding on the side of their horses fell to the ground because their horses were shot. Their heads were bleeding and they suffered heavy losses. When Suhi finally escaped back to Agador Dorji with the army, he discovered that out of the original 10,000 cavalrymen, only 6,000 had really escaped. Seriously counting, in addition to the 1,000 cavalrymen who were injured by the muskets at the beginning and another 1,000 cavalrymen who died during the battle, they had paid the price of nearly 2,000 cavalrymen when they finally escaped. In less than 2 hours they had lost 40% of their forces. Moreover, they were the most elite cavalrymen. This made Suhi, who was the commanding general, feel very distressed. He rode up to Agador Dorji with a face full of anger. He wanted to ask why Agador Dorji did not bring the 10,000 Tatar cavalrymen when they clearly had the opportunity to win. Not only did they miss the opportunity to win, but they also lost so many brave warriors. Suhi had just appeared, but before he could say anything, Agador Dorji spoke first. How was it? I said that we should focus on probing. You must have seen that the enemy's musketeers were arranged in the southern forest. They are the biggest threat. If we don't get rid of them, the more cavalrymen we send, the greater our losses will be. Speaking of which, we still underestimated the enemy. Fortunately, the enemy's forces are limited. This time they also suffered a lot of casualties. If they want to face our attack again, they will need to send more troops. This way our other two routes will have a chance. As if talking to himself, Agador Dorji made a post-battle conclusion by answering his own questions. He actually forced Suhi to not say a word. He originally wanted to criticize and complain, but he found that he no longer had the chance. This was because there was a trace of killing intent in Agador Dorji's eyes. He dared to guarantee that if he questioned his lord's words, he would be stripped of his military power. It was even possible that he would become a prisoner. Agador Dorji was an extremely selfish person. In order to achieve his goals, he was often unscrupulous. The fact that he was able to get away from his elder brother without falling out with him proved everything. When dealing with such a person, it was absolutely impossible to use common sense to reason with him. Knowing this, Suhi wisely shut his mouth. His original questioning tone also changed to asking for medicine. Facing Suhi's understanding, Agador Dorji was naturally very happy. He readily agreed to transfer the medical supplies in the army to treat the enemy's cavalrymen. As for the result of the previous defeat, both sides tacitly agreed not to mention it. It was as if it had never happened. Compared to the Tatar cavalrymen, the mercenaries' morale was indeed high and the situation was gratifying. In one battle they killed more than 2,800 cavalrymen and captured more than 1,000 enemy soldiers. More than 500 of the mercenaries' cavalrymen died and more than 800 were injured. The main reason was that the Jurchen cavalry suffered heavy losses. Most of the people who died were killed when the enemy first shot arrows at them. Arrange for the injured soldiers to be treated immediately. We can't let a tragic thing happen where people don't die on the battlefield and end up dying from injuries. Yang Qindong rode on the white dragon horse and said to the logistics battalion commander Yang Er, "Young master, please rest assured. Our logistics battalion has recently transferred 300 people to practice their medical skills. It has been quite effective." As the battalion commander, Beta Persei patted his chest and said, "Very good. Clean up the battlefield. Take the captured horses and prisoners back to the first city. Let the people there see that the so-called elite Tatar cavalry is not invincible. Anyone who chooses to be the enemy of our mercenaries will make the biggest mistake of their life." Yang Qindong nodded, then reached out and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. "If the medical officer has extra, treat the injuries of these Tatar cavalrymen. Maybe they will join our camp in the future." "Yes, I will do my best." Beta Persei nodded in agreement. If it was someone else who said that to treat the injuries of the original enemy, he would definitely explode. But these words came from the sixth young master, so of course he would not object. But from the words "do your best," it could be seen that he still had some emotions. After quickly dealing with the post-war matters, Yang Qindong looked to the north and west. He muttered, "The first step of the plan went well. The next step depends on the other two. Let Tiger's Mane come over. It should be time for his independent regiment to show its power." The messenger sent by Agar Dorji delivered the news of the battle in the southern forest in a timely manner. When the news came out, it was already a little out of shape. It was probably because the Tatar cavalry had won a great victory in the battle in the southern forest, which put a lot of pressure on the mercenaries. Next, they would definitely transfer troops to assist the southern forest. Then it was time for them to seize the opportunity. The first to arrive will be rewarded with 10,000 taels of silver. "Ah, good," Haraluaku said with a laugh. Then, when Du looked at the other side of the West River, there was a look of desire in his eyes. Unlike Agar Dorji, Haraluaku was the kind of newborn calf that was not afraid of tigers. Since young, he had been shrouded in his father's halo. In addition, when he was born, his appearance was not obvious and was even a little ugly. This made him want to prove himself more than others. Now that he finally had the opportunity to lead an army alone, and the situation seemed to be very beneficial to him, he began to think about how to make contributions and show off his skills. He even wanted to use his efforts to tell everyone that he was not only Agar Dorji's son, but also a general who could fight well. Of course, Haraluaku was not a hot-headed person. He still decided to see the enemy retreat first, then look for an opportunity to fight. And just as he was looking forward to it, on that night, the camp that was originally lit with torches suddenly became restless. Then, from afar, he could see the enemy troops leaving with torches. Chapter 7:11. Young Master, the enemy really did withdraw their troops. The scout who was ordered to keep an eye on the enemy's situation excitedly opened the door of the tent to report. This caused Haraluo, who had just fallen asleep, to immediately crawl out from under his blankets. "Quickly bring me out to take a look." As soon as he fell asleep, Haraluo dreamt of himself charging across the West River, beating back the mercenaries and arriving at Beginning City. Who would have thought that the dream would come true so quickly? Following the scout, they arrived at the West River. What they saw was the scene of the enemy's torch squad leaving one after another. Although there weren't many torches, the remaining ones moved very frequently. In a short while, he saw 4 to 5 groups of torches leaving the camp. Haraluo made a rough calculation in his heart and revealed a meaningful smile. "These mercenaries are very careful. Do they think that I won't be able to detect their movements if they don't leave in large numbers? You underestimate the heroes of the world too much." Seeing that the mercenaries were using small groups to cover the retreat of the main army, Haraluo was even more certain that the enemy had sent reinforcements to the southern forest. After making up his mind, Haraluo said to the scout beside him, "Pass down my orders. The soldiers will wake up at 4 in the morning and eat at 5 in the morning. After that, the entire army will cross the river. This time we must be the first army to reach Beginning City." Young Master is wise. The scout who had the same idea didn't forget to flatter him. This caused Haraluo to laugh even more loudly. After returning to the tent, Haraluo didn't feel sleepy anymore. He just sat there and waited for the arrival of dawn. After a long time of shouting and cheering, the sky gradually brightened. While the morning fog still lingered on the West River, making it impossible to see the situation on the other side clearly, the 5,000 elite Tatar cavalry had already finished their breakfast. They boarded the wooden rafts that had been prepared earlier and left across the river. Perhaps it was because of the mist on the river, or perhaps the enemy had really retreated. The 5,000 Tatar cavalry actually arrived on the other side of the West River without any obstruction. As soon as they arrived, Haraluo loudly announced the order to attack. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that the enemy wasn't ready to launch a surprise attack and obtain victory. Once the order was given, the 5,000 Tatar cavalry mounted their horses and brandished their swords, charging straight toward the mercenary camp 3 miles away. His shouts could be heard from far away, drifting along with the wind. What was surprising was that there was no movement from the opposite side of the barracks despite all the shouting. This was very illogical. Whether they were panicking or going out of the camp to fight, there had to be a plan. This kind of disregard was really a little strange. Haliruo's face was filled with doubt as he charged at the front of the group. However, a thought quickly surfaced in his mind. The mercenaries must have escaped under the cover of the night. Perhaps they knew that the southern Cyanwood forest could not be defended, so they had already retreated to the Beginning City. If that was the case, then he would lead the large army straight in and charge to the Beginning City. The first merit would undoubtedly belong to him. Ha ha ha. Thinking of this, Halaruo laughed heartily. His 5,000 Tatar cavalry had already arrived in front of the camp. As expected, there was still no movement. From the looks of it, there was no one inside. Many of the Tatar cavalrymen who were originally nervous had relaxed expressions on their faces. Search and see if there is anything valuable left behind. After all, this was an abandoned camp. Just the tents left behind were worth some silver taels. The Tatar cavalry eyed the tents covetously as they dismounted and charged into the tents. Some of the Tatar cavalry took the initiative to stand guard. It had to be said that elites were elites. Even with a great victory at hand, they were still able to maintain a calm formation. It was precisely because these people abided by the rules of war that they were able to escape this disaster. On the other hand, the Tatar cavalry who were eager to obtain the spoils of war had already been locked onto by the god of death the moment they charged into the green tents. Boom! Without any warning, a huge explosion suddenly sounded from a tent. A Tatar horseman who had entered the tent, as well as 5 horsemen standing outside, were immediately sent flying into the air by the powerful explosion. And all of this was only the beginning. It was like a chain reaction, like dominoes being pushed down by someone. Explosions sounded one after another at this moment. The nearby military tents also began to explode continuously at this moment. Those who had entered the tent, those who hadn't entered but had already walked to the front of the tent, as well as some Tatar cavalrymen who were staring at the tent, had all become targets. Amidst the continuous sounds of explosions, these people were engulfed in a sea of fire. What's going on? The continuous explosions shattered Hilario's eardrums, but as the commander he still didn't forget to shout out loud. Even though his voice wasn't even worth mentioning in front of the powerful explosions, and no one could hear him clearly, he still continued to shout out loud. It was destined that no one would answer his question. There was only the continuous explosions and the sudden sounds of killing. At the moment of the explosion, a group of over 5,000 cavalrymen had already surrounded the area. Firearms appeared in the hands of these cavalrymen. They were the main force of the independent regiment that had retreated to this place and returned. Apart from the 2 firearms battalions that were left behind in the southern forest, the remaining 14 independent battalions were all gathered here. The instant the booby traps were detonated, they rushed out as planned, quickly surrounding the panicked and disorderly Tatar cavalry. The greatest damage caused by the explosions wasn't the psychological pressure on the Tatar cavalry, but rather the deterrence of the warhorses. What animals feared the most was fire and powerful sound waves. The exploding mines seemed to have both of these. The warhorses that hadn't experienced such a situation were naturally afraid from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment they instinctively neighed, jumped, and even ran wildly without knowing where to go. It seemed that only by doing so could they relax a little. The usually obedient warhorses suddenly jumped crazily, completely disobeying orders. Many unprepared Tatar cavalrymen were thrown off their horses. Even some of the cavalrymen with good riding skills could only lie on their horses to prevent themselves from being thrown off. It was completely impossible for them to command the warhorses. At this time the mercenaries appeared. While they were still far away, the bullets of their firearms whistled through the air. One shot after another hit the uncontrolled and unprepared Tatar cavalrymen. Blood splattered everywhere. One by one the cavalrymen were shot in the chest or body. They fell off their horses or directly fell to the ground, ending their young lives. Enemy attack, counterattack, prepare to counterattack. The sudden situation in front of him caused a short circuit in Hilario's mind. Then, as if he was suddenly awakened, he began to shout loudly. However, he only managed to shout twice before he was thrown off the back of the horse by the frenzied horse. The intense pain caused him to fall to the ground, unable to make a sound for a long time. It wasn't just 1 or 2 people who suffered the same fate as Hilario, but at least a few hundred cavalrymen. The rest of the Tatar cavalry were either injured from being thrown off their horses, or were still fighting against their horses. Some were even killed by the mercenaries' long-range muskets. There were less than 1,000 Tatar cavalrymen who were able to maintain a certain level of fighting strength. However, these 1,000 cavalrymen were already scared out of their wits. When they saw the sudden change in the army they pulled out their sabers. However, when they saw the number of mercenaries around them, some of the smarter ones obediently put down their sabers, dismounted, and surrendered. Even their commander didn't make a sound of resistance. The other party used firearms that could easily take a person's life from hundreds of feet away. Their morale was inferior, their numbers were inferior, and their weapons were inferior as well. How could they fight this battle? The most precious thing to a person was their life. If they surrendered, they would live. If they resisted, they would die. Their deaths were worthless. As long as they weren't fools, they would know how to make the choice. A total of 14 battalions of independent soldiers charged over like wolves and tigers. They either raised their Type 81 rifles or held their longbows. There were even some who held horse lashings. Step by step they closed in on the enemy. In the eyes of these soldiers, killing intent was overflowing. If anyone wanted to continue resisting, they wouldn't mind silencing them. It was precisely this kind of aura that caused the Tatar cavalrymen who originally wanted to resist to become extremely obedient. After all, no one was willing to joke around with their lives. Especially when there was a surging river behind them. With nowhere else to go, it seemed that surrendering was the only way to survive. As they continued to advance, they continued to capture captives. The 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen had completely lost their morale under the sudden attack of a booby trap. When their commander, Harichu, was knocked unconscious by his warhorse, they became people without a leader. They were successfully incorporated into the independent regiment. One by one they threw down their sabers, jumped off their warhorses and surrendered. The pitiful Harichu was tied up tightly while he was still unconscious. His identity was even betrayed by his subordinates, and he became the target of Tiger's Main's care. Vice Commander Xian, look after these people. Bring them all back to New City. This person needs to be taken care of. I'm afraid that he will come in handy in the upcoming battle. Pointing at the still unconscious Harachu, Tiger's Mane laughed heartily. He then led the 10 soldiers of the independent regiment away from the Shi River and headed towards the north slope. Chapter 7:12. North Slope. General Gulang, who had also received Agar Dorji's message, was in high spirits. As a general who had rendered meritorious service, he wanted to obtain military merits more than anyone else. However, the north slope was difficult to attack, so he was unable to fulfill his ambition. Now, Lord Gulang said that the battle in the southern forest was going smoothly. After the battle, many mercenaries were eliminated. In order to defend there, it was very likely that they would transfer troops from other places to the southern forest. In this way, Gulang's opportunity had appeared. The so-called 10,000 taels of silver for being the first to attack the beginning city did not excite Glenn. He was more interested in this first contribution. This was also a good opportunity for him to wash away his shame. Therefore, after he received the news, he had been sending people to watch every move of the mercenaries on the north slope. However, the more anxious he was, the more there was no news. Half an afternoon and a night passed, but there were still no clues. Just when Gulang was a little impatient and was thinking about whether to send people to ask Lord Gulang again, the scout finally sent news that the mercenaries on the north slope were moving. They seemed to be changing their guard. A large number of people were moving, but because of the terrain, they could not see clearly what was happening. They must have received orders to send reinforcements to the battlefield in the southern forest. After the scout finished reporting the news, Gulang was excited and made some arbitrary conclusions. General, if that's the case, why don't we attack now and attract the enemy here? This is equivalent to giving Lord Gulang more opportunities. The scout misunderstood and asked. There's no need for that. Gulang immediately shook his head. This was an opportunity for him to perform meritorious service. How could he give it to others? Therefore, while shaking his head, he said aloud, Lord Gulang has already sent an order for us to find a way to rush to the beginning city. This is the greatest support for Lord Gulang, understand? Understood, General. The scout replied as if he had understood the situation. After convincing the scout, Gulang said with a slightly excited expression, How about this, you find a way to get as close to the enemy as possible and watch their movements. Once you find that they have finished deploying their troops, inform me. Then prepare the entire army and launch a fierce attack in 2 hours. Gulang still had some brains. He did not attack immediately because he wanted to create an opportunity for the other party to divide their forces. Only in this way could he seize the opportunity to make contributions and rush to the beginning city. His goal was to directly rush into the city. By then, the mercenaries would no longer have a base behind them. With a pincer attack, it would be the time to destroy the mercenaries. If he could really do this, Gulang would have defeated the war god of the Great Ming Dynasty. As a result, his name would resound throughout the entire grassland. At that time, who would dare to look down on him? At that time, he would be able to raise his voice even in front of Lord Agar Dorj. Glenn was very excited and looked forward to the future. However, he did not know that the mercenaries on the north slope were not really splitting up. They were just faking it. They had even dug a large enough pit to trap horses on the top of the slope, and had even joined forces with the Tiger's Mane independent regiment that had rushed over from the West River. They were just waiting for him to attack, and then they would give him a head-on blow and take him down in one fell swoop. This was originally one of Yang Qindong's plans. First, he would engage in a battle with the main force of the Tatar army on the battlefield that was most suitable for cavalry charges. In order to show the enemy that he was weak, he deliberately lowered the power of the continuous fire guns. This was to make Agar Dorj underestimate the enemy and think that he would definitely mobilize troops from the other 2 places in order to defend the southern forest. Once this news spread to the West River and the North Slope, they would fall into the trap and send out troops. In this way he could gather the superior forces to launch a counterattack and achieve his goal of defeating them one by one. In this way he could gather the main force of the Tatar army again and achieve his goal of defeating them in one battle. Gulang, who did not know about this, was eager to make contributions. When he heard that the mercenaries on the top of the slope might have split up, he looked for an opportunity to kill his way up. Only half an hour after he received the news, the mercenaries who rushed to support the southern forest should have gone far away and would not be back for a while. The Tatar cavalry under the slope had begun to attack. Although it was said to be a slope, it was not very urgent. It was just that the slope was longer and was not suitable for the cavalry to charge. However, if the cavalry worked hard, they would still be able to charge up. It was just that they would need more time. This time it was no longer a probing attack. The first charge was to send out 2,000 cavalry as the vanguard. Different from the previous two charges, these 2,000 cavalry were only met with sporadic resistance and had already charged halfway up the slope. Looking at the top of the slope, there were only a few hundred mercenaries who were giving out bows and arrows. Haha, as expected. Seeing that the front army was progressing so smoothly, Gulang laughed endlessly. He finally gave the order for the entire army to attack. Immediately, 10,000 Tatar cavalry loudly shouted and charged up the slope from the bottom of the mountain. On the top of the slope, the independent regiment's commander Tiger Mane and the cavalry reinforced regiment's commander Windchaser used binoculars to stare at the Tatar cavalry under the slope. The two of them revealed a look of disbelief. What a good-for-nothing. Even if it is a charge, it should not be so fast. Windchaser shook his head and put down the binoculars in his hand. He sighed and said, "Haha, good for a good-for-nothing. Our plan can be carried out even more smoothly. We can go support the southern forest even faster. The young master has been waiting for our good news." Tiger Mane also put down the binoculars in his hand. Then he reached for his waist and took out a 54 handgun. It was the basic equipment for mercenary officers and above. It was also a symbol of status. With Tiger Mane's status, he had already been equipped with this kind of high-level weapon. Now that he took it out, he was preparing to launch a counterattack. Windchaser also took out a 54 handgun from his waist. Then he carefully wiped it again and again. When the entire body of the gun was wiped until it seemed like it was reflecting light, he opened the safety and aimed it at the top of the slope. This time he also wanted to have fun with a handgun. Seeing Windchaser's excited appearance, Tiger Mane smiled and kindly reminded him, "Commander Windchaser, a handgun is not like a spear. The shooting distance is limited. If it is too far, it won't have any effect." I know. Windchaser repeatedly nodded. However, it could be seen that Windchaser was still a bit nervous. It was just like the first time he held a blade and rode on a horse. The two commanders only hid and didn't move. The other mercenaries also waited in their positions. Just like this, the Tatar cavalry charged halfway up the slope and into their line of sight. Deng Yu, who was in charge of luring the enemy, looked like he was going all out to stop the advance of the Tatar cavalry. However, it was obvious that because of the small number of people, he was powerless. Seeing the enemy rushing up, he immediately panicked and shouted to retreat. Immediately, hundreds of cavalry turned around and fled. That clean and neat appearance attracted bursts of laughter from the Tatar cavalry behind. Under the laughter, Gulang also rushed to the top of the slope with the main cavalry. He also saw the scene of Deng Yu leading the cavalry to retreat. Ah, good. Now we have successfully reached the top of the slope. Next, it is time for us to make a contribution. Boys, charge together with this general. The first to reach the beginning city will be rewarded with 100 silver taels. After Gulang shouted to boost the morale, the Tatar cavalry in front of him shouted excitedly. Then they rushed forward crazily. They wanted to follow behind Deng Yu to see if they could kill the enemy in the process of chasing. At the same time, they also wanted to get closer to the beginning city. In this way, Deng Yu ran in front. Behind him, there were tens of thousands of Tatar cavalry waving their sabers. From time to time, there would be people shooting arrows. Although the distance was still far and it was impossible to shoot, it did have a big deterrent effect. Deng Yu, who was running in front, looked back from time to time. When he saw that the Tatar cavalry had indeed fallen into the trap and caught up with him, the corner of his eyes showed a trace of a proud smile. He looked back and saw the inconspicuous road sign on the side of the road. He said loudly to the cavalry warriors beside him, "We will soon reach the horse trap area." Everyone split up according to the plan. The mercenary cavalry who had been informed in advance of the trap immediately split into two sides, leaving the dangerous area and continuing to run forward. Some of the Tatar cavalry who were less than a mile behind also noticed this scene, but they didn't take it to heart. In their opinion, the enemy was probably in a panic and didn't know where to go. Since that was the case, they would just chase after them. Perhaps they were eager to make a contribution, perhaps they were impatient and careless, or perhaps they were arrogant and underestimated the enemy. In short, the Tatar cavalry broke into the horse trap that the mercenaries had already dug. Previously, they had considered the large number of enemies, so when the horse trap was dug, the scale was very large. It was more than 30 meters wide and 3 miles long. It consumed a lot of manpower and material resources, and now it could finally be put to use. Without any surprise, the Tatar cavalry fell into the trap. Before the first row of cavalry realized what was going on, their warhorses' heads sank and they fell into the 4-meter-deep pit. This was only the beginning. More and more Tatar cavalry fell into the pit like dumplings. They were advancing dauntlessly, wave after wave, and there was no break in between. One after another, more than half of the 2,000 vanguard cavalry fell into the pit. This finally attracted the attention of the other cavalry behind them. More and more Tatar cavalry pulled on the reins of their warhorses and stopped in place. What's going on? General Glenn rushed over under the protection of a group of soldiers. When he saw the scene in front of him, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. More than 1,000 cavalry fell into the pit, and most of them were injured because of the trampling of their warhorses. Some of them were even covered in blood and died. Chapter 7:13. Bastards, damn mercenaries. Seeing that he had lost more than 10% of his troops, Glenn was naturally furious. When he raised his head to look at the mercenaries who were still retreating along the path, he said angrily, "Chase, continue to chase after them. They don't have any more tricks up their sleeves. I want to catch them and tear them into pieces." In Glenn's view, this was clearly the last resort of the mercenaries. This also proved that the other party had no other tricks up their sleeves. Otherwise, how could they set up such a big trap? It was too late and they didn't have time to rescue the cavalry who fell into the pit. After asking them to think of a way to save themselves, Glenn led most of the cavalry and continued to pursue the enemy. For safety reasons, he deliberately sent a cavalry team of 100 people to walk in front to prevent the appearance of traps. Obviously, this kind of worry was unnecessary. Large-scale horse traps required a lot of manpower and resources. Even if the mercenaries had individual shovels in their hands, it would be much easier to dig them out. However, such a large-scale trap with a wide area was not something that could be easily dug out. After chasing for another 3 miles, they were still very safe. This also made the Tatar cavalry who was originally nervous began to feel relieved. They began to speed up. Glenn, who was walking in the team, thought that at this speed, they should be able to reach the beginning city around noon. Disaster always came when there was the most hope, just like the darkness before dawn. Just when the Tatar cavalry thought that they saw hope and discovered that the distance between them and the mercenaries was shortened from 1 mile to less than 300 meters, suddenly, a loud gunshot broke the previous silence. Tiger's Mane, who was hiding in the grass on both sides of the road, opened fire. With the help of the half-meter-tall grass, he fired the first shot and hit a centurion who was shouting to urge the cavalry to move forward. The gunshot was an order. This shot led Windchaser to fire a shot as well. It was a pity that he still needed to practice his marksmanship. Although the distance was less than 40 meters, this shot still missed and didn't hurt anyone. But it didn't matter. After this shot, it attracted the attention of the 4 independent battalions who were lying in ambush at the same time. They were the only firearm battalion other than the 2 Southern Forest battalions. The 4 battalions had a total of 1,600 men. Gunshots rang out in unison, and in just one wave they killed the 1,000 Tatar cavalry charging at the front. When the Tatar cavalrymen were killed one after another, the entire Tatar cavalrymen were shocked and panicked. At this moment, along with the second wave of gunfire, the mercenaries who were fleeing stopped in their tracks. Not only that, but thousands of cavalrymen also appeared beside them. They brandished their sabers or held bows and arrows as they charged towards them. The arrogant Tatar cavalry was stunned by the sudden change in front of them. They watched as their companions were killed one by one on their horses. When they saw the cavalry getting closer and closer, many arrows were already falling in front of them. Some of their companions were even injured. They began to feel fear. The vanguard cavalry was killed by spears or arrows one by one. They were unable to exert enough fighting power. It was like a fist being held down by someone. When they were unable to kill the enemy, the strength of the Tatar cavalry was suppressed to the greatest extent. They could only passively take a beating. Don't panic, the warriors in front will attack the enemy with your sabers, the warriors in the back will be ready to attack. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, Gulang yelled. He knew that he had fallen into the enemy's trap, but at this moment he didn't have a better solution. If he retreated now, he might not have the chance to make a comeback. So he could only endure. The shout of the commander calmed down some of the Tatar cavalrymen. Some of them brandished their sabers and charged forward, while others held their bows and arrows ready to counterattack. After all, they had lived on horseback since they were young. Although there was an unknown change in the situation, their good psychological quality allowed them to quickly calm down. Throw grenades and break the enemy's formation. Prepare the bazookas and break their psychological defense. Tiger's Mane, who was hiding on the side of the road, was also shocked by the Tatar cavalryman's fighting spirit. Fortunately, he still had a backup plan that could break the enemy's psychological defense. Under the order, some of the soldiers of the independent regiment took out the weapons they had prepared for a long time from their backs or waists. Tiger's Mane specifically asked them to stay behind when the 3 divisions of the Cold Front Division left. There were still a lot of grenades, and although there weren't many bazookas, it was still enough to deter the enemy. When these heavy weapons were taken out and activated, countless grenades were thrown at the Tatar cavalrymen like rain. There were also 2 bazookas loaded with shells and began to fire. The situation on the battlefield instantly became very tense. Boom 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 boom, boom boom boom, boom. First, there was a series of loud bangs from the grenades. They smashed a huge hole in the Tatar cavalry, causing countless warhorses to lose their composure amidst their neighs. They no longer listened to the orders of the cavalrymen and danced wildly. 2 rocket launchers were launched to completely suppress the Tatar cavalry's charge. When one of the rocket launchers landed 200 meters away in the enemy's main camp, the fighting spirit that had just been gathered due to Gulang's words suffered a heavy blow in an instant. Under the roar of the bazooka, the cavalrymen were completely stunned by the scene of flames and debris flying in the air. They had never seen such a situation before and didn't know how to deal with it. The warhorses under them became the fuse that led to their final defeat. The warhorses were terrified and ran for their lives. They didn't care about the feelings of their masters and didn't listen to any of their orders. It was a mess, a complete mess. In the chaos, horses bumped into each other and people bumped into each other. Before the mercenary cavalrymen rushed to the front, the Tatar cavalrymen had already fallen into the process of killing each other. One after another, the cavalrymen were thrown off their horses. One after another, the warhorses crashed into each other and fell to the ground. This time Gulang wasn't spared. After all, when the warhorse went crazy, he didn't care if it was an ordinary soldier or a general who commanded thousands of troops. Under extreme fear, they only knew how to instinctively run and crash in all directions. Before Gulang could continue to issue orders, he was thrown to the ground by the warhorse. Then, he was unlucky enough to be trampled by another warhorse that came out of nowhere. A weight of more than 1,000 kilograms pressed down on his body, causing Glenn to involuntarily open his mouth and widen his eyes. A series of crisp sounds rang in his ears. It was the sound of his ribs being crushed. Pfff. A mouthful of blood spurted out from Gulang's mouth without warning. When the warhorse finally trampled over him, he was unfortunately trampled by another warhorse from afar. Under the continuous trampling, the only thing Gulang could do was to keep coughing up blood. Then, the strength in his body started to disappear. At the same time, the blood in his body and the strength in his breath also disappeared. In such a chaotic world, Gulang reluctantly closed his eyes and breathed his last breath. Gulang was dead. With the death of their general, the soldiers under him lost their commander and the formation became even more chaotic. In addition, there were more than 1 or 2 Tatar cavalrymen who suffered the same fate as Glenn. When the number of Tatar cavalrymen gradually grew to a certain scale, their will to resist was completely worn away. The remaining Tatar cavalrymen only wanted to escape from this purgatory of the human world. They had no other thoughts. Charge. Kill. Dismount and throw your swords. Those who surrender will not be killed. At this moment, a large number of mercenary cavalry arrived. Taking advantage of this unstoppable momentum and chaos, they slaughtered their way into the chaotic Tatar cavalry as if they were in a no-man's land. Raising their swords, they chopped down one enemy after another under their horses. Under the strong morale, many of the defeated Tatar cavalrymen chose to surrender. After all, knowing that they would die if they resisted, it was not bravery but foolishness. 10,000 Tatar cavalrymen suffered heavy losses, especially under the attacks of muskets, grenades and rocket launchers. Their will to fight was disintegrated. In the end, they abandoned their remaining will to fight in their dignity. They became defeated soldiers and captives. Whew! Tiger Edge let out a long sigh and stood up from the grass. He then looked at Wind Chaser, who had an equally excited expression, and said, "Let's hurry up. The young master is still waiting for us to reinforce and regroup." Okay. Wind Chaser also knew that they were able to obtain victory here because of the support of the independent firearms unit. Since they had won, what they needed to do now was to rush to the southern forest with the fastest speed and meet up with the 6th young master to annihilate the last of the Tatar cavalrymen. Come, hurry up and clean up the battlefield. If anyone doesn't surrender, kill them. Don't waste time. The will to fight had been defeated, so the next step was much easier. Clean up the battlefield and capture the captives. Windchaser had already given the order. The soldiers under him still wanted to go to the southern forest and continue to make contributions. In their impatience, whenever they encountered a Tatar cavalryman who showed resistance or didn't surrender, they would kill them without saying anything. It was precisely because of such cruel actions that the Tatar cavalry became afraid. These mercenaries really didn't take human lives seriously. When they saw someone coming over to persuade them to surrender, they didn't dare to hesitate and threw down their swords and dismounted from their horses. 10,000 cavalrymen, 3,000 died, 2,000 were injured and 5,000 were captured. And to complete these actions it only took them 2 hours. Could be said that they were very fast. Send 1,000 cavalrymen and a battalion of firearmed soldiers to transport the captives and the wounded back to the beginning city. The rest of you follow me to the southern forest. Hurry. Seeing that the situation was settled, Tiger's Mane's voice was slightly anxious. He was really worried about the young master's safety. Chapter 7:14. Southern Forest. Since the morning, Agador had issued a decision to send out a small group of cavalry to provoke the enemy. According to Agador, what they had to do now was to constantly put pressure on the mercenaries on the opposite side, forcing them to withdraw their troops from the West River and the North Slope battlefield, creating an opportunity for the Tatar cavalry to advance. In this regard, General Suhi expressed a different opinion. In his opinion, since they already knew the strength of the enemy's army, what they should do now was to immediately launch a decisive battle and rely on their advantage in numbers to severely injure the enemy, instead of launching a probing attack to give the enemy more time to prepare. General Su, you have seen the strength of the mercenaries, especially their firearms, which can be said to be accurate and long-range. Do you think that if we fight head-on there will be a winner in the end? Injuring the enemy and losing 800 of our own men is not what I want. I have never thought of swallowing the mercenaries. To be honest, we don't have that big of an appetite. Our goal is to drive them away and occupy the beginning city. So don't ask for a battle. Let's focus on the overall situation. After seeing Suhi ask for a battle several times in a row, Agador finally lost his patience and said this somewhat angrily. Seeing that Agador had made up his mind, Suhi could do nothing but feel heartache. Walking out of the military camp, he looked up at the sky helplessly and then said sadly, "God wants me to die." Compared with Agar Dorji's so-called view of the overall situation, in Suhi's view, it was just a manifestation of timidity. It was because this person was afraid of death, afraid that the army would be severely damaged, and afraid that his own strength would be damaged, so he placed his hopes on the other two routes. But in fact, whether it was Haraluaku or Glenn, Suhi did not think highly of them. Of these two, one was born as a son of a rich family, and the other was a general of a defeated army. Both of them belonged to the kind of people who had no strategy. It was simply self-deceiving and extremely unrealistic and irresponsible to put the hope of victory on them. It was just that Agador believed too much in the saying that numbers could defeat everything. He didn't listen to her advice at all, which made Suhi feel helpless. The only thing he could do was to watch small troops step forward and serve as whetstones for the mercenaries. That's right, when the mercenaries faced the Tatar cavalry, they did not choose to charge with their entire army. Instead, they chose to send small groups to harass the Tatar cavalry. After dispatching the main force of the independent regiment, Yang Qindong was left with less than 5,000 cavalry. Facing more than 10,000 Tatar cavalry, unless he was willing to take out all the firearms in his warehouse, it would be extremely difficult for him to win. Even Yang Qindong was prepared for the worst. If he couldn't hold on, he would slowly retreat and use the cooperation of the two gun battalions to exchange space for time. As long as the enemies at the West River and the North Slope were dealt with, he would have more troops to deploy. At that time, it would be time for him to launch an all-out counterattack. Unexpectedly, the other party seemed to know what he was thinking and cooperated with him. They did not choose to charge with their entire army, but instead sent small groups to harass the enemy. This was exactly what he wanted. After discussing with the two regimental commanders, Yella and Lu Jua, he decided to send a small group of cavalry to confront the enemy head-on and treat it as actual combat training. It was true that Agador brought elite Tatar cavalry, but the strength of the mercenaries was not bad either. In particular, their training was several times better than the other forces. It could be said that the combat strength of the cavalry was increasing every day. In addition, their cavalry sabers were sharp and tough, which increased their chances of winning by a bit. Now that the other party wanted to fight with fewer people, of course they would help. In this way, the other side would send out a few hundred people, and the other side would send out a few hundred people. Both sides began a cavalry charge outside the vast southern forest. A cavalry charge focused on morale and proficiency in horsemanship. One had to know how to use the warhorse as a part of one's body and control it flexibly. Of course, the sharpness of the weapon also played a large role. In terms of morale, there was nothing to say about the mercenaries. Yang Qindong, who did not lack money, gave them high rewards in terms of money. Not only that, but being a soldier under him also gave them a good social status. Not only would a soldier bring glory to his family, but he could also feed his family. Their horsemanship had also improved under hard training. Even if they could not compare to the elites of the Mongol cavalry, normal cavalry would not be a match for them. Furthermore, the cavalry swords were made by the Chimeric City Munitions Factory, so the materials used were abundant. Its sharpness and toughness were unparalleled, which made up for some of the shortcomings in horsemanship. They had high morale, excellent horsemanship and excellent weapons. In a true battle of 100 cavalry against 100 cavalry, the mercenary cavalry would not be afraid of anyone. This was especially so when they had the 3-to-3 tactic. Although it was not as effective as on land, it was enough to increase their combat strength. All in all, in a cavalry charge with equal numbers, the mercenaries were not afraid of anyone. Even if the opponent was the Tatar cavalry, and the elites of the Tatar cavalry, the outcome would be the same. This was evident from the 3 consecutive battles. In the first battle they killed 60 enemy cavalry and lost 40 of their own. In the second battle they killed 70 enemy cavalry and lost 43 of their own. In the third battle they killed 55 enemy cavalry and lost 45 of their own. The first and second battles were fought by the Nuzan cavalry. In the third battle, it was Lujua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Just from the results of the battle, the Nuzan cavalry was indeed very powerful, worthy of their name. Of course, this result had a lot to do with the cavalry swords in their hands. In the end, the results were mostly because the enemy's cavalry swords were broken and could not fight anymore. After 3 consecutive battles, the mercenaries' morale was even higher. On the other hand, the Tatar cavalry were not in a good situation. General Su He's face was even gloomier. She thought that the previous defeat was because the other side used guns and had good tactical cooperation. She was defeated by the combination of inside and outside. But now, it seemed that there was no need for tactics. With the same number of soldiers, they were no match for the enemy. This made him have another thought. Was it a mistake to choose to be the enemy of the mercenaries this time? The Tatar cavalry needed to find a new base because of the lack of provisions, but did it have to be the beginning city? But it was obviously too late to say this now. The war had already begun, and it was no longer a situation where one side could retreat as they wished. For example, if they ordered a retreat now, it would be a great blow to the Tatar cavalry's morale. If the mercenaries chased after them at this time, it was likely to lead to a one-sided battle. If that was the case, they would lose without a fight. Feeling that if the battle continued like this, even if there was good news from the West River and the North Slope, the morale of the troops would still be damaged. Suhi once again walked into the tent of Commander-in-Chief Agar Dorj and put forward his request. That was, they could not continue fighting. Sir, we can't continue fighting. After 3 battles we have lost. The morale of the troops has begun to become unstable. Suhi said with a worried face. Yes, Agar Dorj, who was sitting at the head of the tent, replied absent-mindedly. Sir, what are you thinking about? Seeing that Agar Dorj's expression was a little ugly, Suhi asked casually out of concern. It's nothing. It's just that the scouts we sent out suddenly stopped responding. There's also no news from the West River and the North Slope. It's been almost a day. Do you think there's a problem? Agar Dorj hesitated for a moment, but considering that Suhi was his general, there were some things that he should not hide from him. So he carefully told him what had happened. What? Originally, Suhi thought that Agar Dorj was too tired from the battle and had some problems with his body. However, when he heard this question, his jaw dropped in shock. The scouts' communication with the outside world had been cut off. What did this mean? It meant that they had become deaf and blind, which was a taboo in war. When 2 armies fought, although it did not necessarily require one to know the situation of the other side, one should at least know where one's own troops were. But now they were not even clear about their own situation. What could it be other than a big problem? How long ago did this happen? Suhi felt a strong sense of crisis, and he was even more anxious to know the specific details of the matter. After the battle yesterday afternoon, there was no news from the outside world. At first, I thought that the scouts might have gone to rest because it was dark, but there was still no news until dawn. In the morning, I sent out some more scouts and told them that no matter what happened, they had to report back within 4 hours. But now it has been 6 hours and not a single scout has returned. As Agadorji spoke, he looked at Suhi. It seemed that he was asking for her advice and wanted to hear her opinion. It could be seen that Agar Dorj still had a trace of hope in his eyes. Perhaps he was still thinking that the scouts had been delayed by something and that they would return to report to him after a while. Suhi's mind was much calmer than Agar Dorj's. What was a scout? They were the most flexible people in an army. They were all warriors that were picked out of 100. Not only were their individual qualities strong, but their reactions were also very agile. Under normal circumstances, it was rare for a mission to go wrong when it was assigned to them. But now there was no news from all the scouts that were sent out. There could only be one possibility, and that was that there was a collective problem. In other words, there should have been an inescapable net set up around them long ago, completely enveloping them. Chapter 7:15. That was the only way for such an outcome to occur. In the face of such an obvious problem, Agadorji, as the commander-in-chief, still had a fluke and fantasy mentality. Suhi was so angry that she couldn't say a word. However, this wasn't the time to pursue the matter. Instead, he had to solve the problem. Although there was anger in her heart, Suhi still suppressed the anger in her heart. She tried to say in a calm but anxious tone, "Your Excellency, I'm afraid things are not good now." "How is it not looking good?" Hearing Suhi's analysis, Agar Dorji's heart skipped a beat. "My lord, scouts are the strongest army. Even if they don't complete the mission well, they should still be able to return and report back. But now that they can't even do that, it can only mean that something has happened to them. Not only them, but I'm afraid that young Master Hala and General Gulang aren't in a good situation either." Suhi voiced out his suspicions. "They aren't in a good situation either? That can't be. They have a total of 15,000 cavalrymen, and how many mercenaries do they have? Their main force can't even move in front of us, so how could they have the strength to attack us?" Agar Dorji said with a look of disbelief. "My lord, now is not the time to be thinking about luck. We didn't know how strong the mercenaries are before, but after these 2 days, it's obvious that we underestimated them. Since that's the case, anything is possible. For safety's sake, I suggest that we retreat immediately and meet up with young Master Hala and General Gulang's troops." Suhi didn't dare to take any chances. A commander was walking on a single plank bridge. Being careful was one of the necessary qualities. "Retreat now? Is it that serious?" Agadorji finally looked at the situation seriously, his expression becoming more and more serious. "Yes," Suhi said in a very positive tone. Previously they were worried that a sudden retreat would cause unnecessary trouble or even some unnecessary losses. But now it seemed that there was no other choice but to retreat. It was better than being annihilated one by one. In the face of Suhi's resolute attitude, Agadorji's face finally crumbled. If the situation is as serious as the general says, then we should retreat. However, the arrangements will depend on the general's plan." "All right, I'll arrange it now. It's already evening now. I'll immediately arrange for the army to start a fire and prepare a meal. When the sky is completely dark, we'll retreat overnight." Suhi cupped his fists with a solemn expression. "We'll do as you say." Agar Dorji's mind was already in a mess because of these words. He could no longer make any correct judgments and could only listen to his subordinate. Suhi finally left the barracks. As soon as he came out, he took a deep breath and looked at the mercenary camp 5 miles away. He then narrowed his eyes and called a guard and said, "Order the army to start a fire and prepare a meal immediately. Also, arrange for 100 cavalry to challenge the mercenaries." The guard had a puzzled look on his face. Previously, the general was against such a small army fighting. It was no different from sending them to their deaths, and it would be a blow to their morale. Why did the general change his mind in such a short period of time? But since it was the general's order, of course he would obey. After cupping his fists, he turned around and made the arrangements. After watching the guard leave, Suhi looked at the mercenary camp again and murmured, "I underestimated you, but once we leave this time, the next time we come, we will definitely let you know the power of the Tatar cavalry." Mercenary camp. Yang Qindong was resting in the big tent when Beta Persei suddenly entered the tent to report that the Tatars had sent another 100 cavalry to challenge them. "They sent people again?" Yang Qindong raised his head when he heard this. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. "Yes, they sent another 100-men team. They are now 2 miles away from our camp and have already set up a formation. Beta Persei nodded and replied. Then arrange for the 2nd Regiment to send a company of brothers to meet them. Oh, by the way, call Commander Yella and Lu Zhuo to come over for a meeting. After Yang Qindong finished arranging, he instructed again. For some reason, he felt a faint sense of uneasiness in his heart. Beta Persei left, but after a cup of tea he reappeared. Along with him were the commander of the Nuzan Cavalry Regiment, Yella, and the commander of the 2nd Regiment, Lu Zhuo. Hello, 6th Young Master. As soon as the 2 regimental commanders entered the tent, they were extremely respectful. You're welcome, take a seat wherever you like. Beta Persei served the tea. Yang Qindong invited the 2 regimental commanders to sit in front of him with a smile on his face. As soon as the 2 of them sat down, he said, It's almost dark, and the Tatars have sent troops to challenge us again. What do the 2 of you think? Originally, the 2 of them were receiving tea from Beta Persei, but when they suddenly heard this, they were both stunned. Then the 2 regimental commanders looked at each other and fell into deep thought. Since it was the 6th young master who asked the question, it naturally wouldn't be so simple. Previously, the 2 of them didn't take this matter seriously. They thought that since the other party had challenged them 3 times in a day, it wouldn't be a big deal if there was a 4th time. But now they didn't dare to think this way. Those who could become regimental commanders were those who were favored by Yang Qindong in the field of military affairs. They all had some skills and some of them were even quite capable. Now that they were reminded, the 2 of them thought for a while and found the problem. Could it be that they're hiding something? Lu Zhuo was the first to speak. Yella followed up and asked, Could it be that they're going to make a big move and are using this as a cover? Not only did Yang Qindong ask this question, but the 2 of them also said this. After thinking about it, they also found something strange. For example, why would they send cavalry to challenge them at such a late hour? For example, they had lost all 3 battles during the day, but why would they want to carry out a 4th battle? Could it be that they had found a way to attack? Just as the 2 regimental commanders finished speaking, the curtain of the military tent was lifted and the captain of the 1st Guard team, Qiu Vi, walked in. As soon as he came to Yang Qindong's side, he stood at attention and said, Reporting to the 6th young master, the 100 Tatar cavalry that came to challenge us this time are the same as before. Also, you asked me to observe the other party's movements. The scout said that the other party is cooking, and the camp looks very busy. That's right. After Yang Qindong heard this, he slapped his thigh and laughed. He felt that something was wrong before, so after Beta Persei went out, he called Qiu Vi and asked him to inquire about these 2 things. The answer to the first thing already proved that the other party didn't have any new methods. In other words, the so-called Tatar cavalry didn't have any new methods to attack. The second thing was to see if there were any changes in the Tatar camp. The conclusion now confirmed a lot of things. It was the end of July and the days were long and the nights were short. In order to prevent the soldiers from starving at night, meals were served late. Generally, when there was no war, meals wouldn't be served so early. Based on this alone, the Tatar camp's actions could be considered abnormal. What kind of person was Yang Qindong? With an extra lifetime of experience, the things he had seen and heard were far more powerful than the others. Especially his work in his previous life required him to be cautious. Many times, if the slightest problem was not discovered and solved in time, it would lead to irreparable consequences. So in terms of courage and carefulness, no one could compare to him. The sudden challenge from the Tatar cavalry made him vigilant, so it was not surprising. Of course, if Suhi knew that he deliberately sent troops to challenge them in order to show that he was normal, but this kind of behavior was a bit excessive and would attract attention, he wouldn't know whether he should cry or cry. The enemy will definitely make a move. If my guess is correct, they are most likely preparing to retreat. Yang Qindong summarized the 2 pieces of information he just received. It was a bit arbitrary but also a bit resolute. The enemy is retreating. Hearing the news, Yila and Lu Zhuo were startled, but they quickly nodded. As the saying goes, when things are abnormal, there must be a demon. According to this kind of inference, the 6th young master's words were very reasonable. Since they guessed that the enemy was retreating, the 2 commanders immediately became spirited. 6th young master, we should also immediately make preparations. Let's eat now and then keep an eye on them. Once we discover that they are retreating, we will chase after them and kill them. We will heavily injure or even wipe them out. No. To their surprise, Yang Qindong shook his head. Then he smiled and said, We will chase after them, but there is no need to eat. We can inform the soldiers to eat some cold food. In any case, the weather is hot right now, so it doesn't matter. The enemy doesn't want us to guess their intentions, so how can we not cooperate? Ah. By the way, Tiger's Mane and Windchaser should be rushing over with the army. Let's see where they are now. Yang Qindong's intention was to have a good rest at night and wait until tomorrow morning to launch an all-out counterattack. However, the plan was not as fast as changes. Since the enemy was already vigilant, the timing of the attack would naturally change. Young master, I will go and check. Beta Persei quickly nodded and walked out of the military tent. Yang Qindong was left behind to discuss the pursuit with the two commanders. After a while, Beta Persei walked back. Young master, I asked the scouts. They said that Tiger's Mane and Windchaser's Mane are rushing over to me. They should be able to meet us here in 1.5 hours. 1.5 hours. At that time the sky will be dark. I'm afraid they won't give us that much time. Yang Qindong said thoughtfully. Then he seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly got up and came to the sand table. He looked at it very seriously, then pointed to the west of Nanlin and said, Send scouts to inform Tiger's Mane and Windchaser. Tell them not to come to us directly. Go to the place where the Tatar army retreated and set up an ambush. Tell them that time is limited and they must rush over as fast as possible. We will try to buy them some more time. Beta Persei accepted the order and left. Yang Qindong looked at Yila and Luzhua and said, You two will have to work hard. Immediately go down and have a mobilization meeting. Remember, don't gather together. Tell the officers below to hold the meeting in a row. In short, don't attract the enemy's attention. Chapter 7:16. Tatar Camp. The cavalry was eating. Su He, who had finished his meal first, walked out of the military tent. A scout came to him and reported in a low voice, General, there is nothing unusual on the side of the mercenaries. Su He replied calmly, and his heart was slightly relieved. This time they sacrificed another 100-man team to challenge the mercenaries. Presumably the other party should still be immersed in the joy of victory. They probably wouldn't have thought that they, who had just challenged the mercenaries, were now ready to retreat. Speaking of which, Su He still had another way to go. That was to go all out and fight the mercenaries to the death. It was just that in this way, even if they could win with the combat power of the mercenaries, they could only win with great difficulty. Without enough strength, even if they occupied the origin city, could they defend it? This was also a problem. In a big battle they paid a sufficient price, but did not get the corresponding benefits. This was definitely not what Su He wanted, let alone what Agador wanted. In desperation they had no choice but to retreat. Fortunately, no one would think that they would suddenly retreat when they had the advantage. In this way, once they gathered young Master Hararo's troops and General Gulang's troops, their strength was still not small. They could still attack and retreat freely. Didn't the Han people have a saying, where there is life, there is hope? As long as they had enough strength, they would not die out in the grassland. At worst, they could go and snatch other people's territories. With the strength of nearly 40,000 cavalry in their hands, how many people could be their opponent? It was a pity that the origin city was not fated to be with them. Thinking of this, Su He still felt a little regretful. In this way, pass down the order. After eating, have a good rest. When the sky is completely dark, we will retreat. Inform all the cavalry that no one can light the torches. Just leave quietly. Since they had decided to leave, there was obviously no need to think about other things. After Su He shook his head vigorously, he instructed the scout beside him. It had to be said that Su He was worthy of being a famous general. He was very careful when doing things. If the opponent this time was not Yang Qindong but someone else, perhaps he would have been deceived by him. The sky gradually darkened, to the point where they had to use torches to see the road under their feet. But from afar he could still see some shadows, so Su He wanted to wait a little longer. But at this moment an unexpected thing happened. Suddenly, a scout came to report that the mercenaries had sent a team of 100 cavalrymen to challenge them. They want to challenge me? It's already so late. Can you still see clearly? Su He was surprised and puzzled when he heard the news. The scout also had a confused look on his face. He was only responsible for passing on the message. Other things were not for him to consider or question. All right, since they're here, then let's fight. How about this? Arrange a team of 100 to fight with them. But make sure to tell them that if they can't win, then retreat. There's nothing to be ashamed of. This is also my order. Su He did not want to agree, but if he did not agree, what would he do if the other side was alerted? In the end, he had no choice but to accept the challenge. What Suhi didn't know was that this was just Yang Qindong's stalling tactic. He was giving Suhi a taste of his own medicine. Right now he needed time to give Tiger Edge, Windchaser, and the others some time. After thinking about it, sending someone to challenge them now was the best option. If it was a normal day, the Tatar tribe might not agree if they sent people to challenge them at this time. But now they wanted to escape. As the saying goes, a thief has a guilty conscience. They would definitely accept the challenge. With this in mind, a company of cavalrymen was sent out. So he did not think too much about it. In his opinion, the other side clearly wanted to continue showing off their strength. Moreover, he had issued 4 challenges during the day. Wouldn't he allow them to challenge him again? This was a very normal thing. Just like this, when night fell, both sides sent a team of 100 to fight on the prairie. The result was needless to say. Of course, the Tatar cavalrymen were defeated. Compared to the day, this battle was shorter. But even so, the mercenaries were able to gain half an hour of time. This was because even after the battle ended, the victorious mercenaries didn't retreat immediately. Instead, they stood on the spot and cursed for a while. After cursing to their heart's content, they laughed heartily and said that they were going back for dinner and returned happily. The scout came back with news that there were fireworks in the mercenary camp. This made Suhi feel relieved. Since the other side chose to cook at this time, they must not have thought that he would escape. The opportunity finally came. Pass down the order. The army will retreat in order. Leave the torches and tents behind. In order to completely cover up the traces of the retreat, Suhi made a lot of sacrifices. When the sky was completely dark, the Tatar cavalrymen finally began to retreat. Agar Dorj was in the army and he retreated with the first army. He left the dangerous task of covering the retreat to General Suhi. Under the cover of the night, the scouts who were lurking within a mile of the Tatar camp saw everything with the help of night vision devices. Seeing that everything was as the 6th young master said, and that the enemy was really retreating overnight, the scouts secretly admired him and immediately sent someone to report the news. The mercenaries who did not hold torches had already mounted their horses, their swords were sheathed, and their bows were on their bodies. The news from the scouts confirmed the 6th young master's guess. There would be a big battle soon and it would be a chase. All the soldiers were somewhat excited. Yang Qindong was also riding on the white dragon horse. After hearing the exact news from the scout, his expression was also filled with excitement, and he shouted a good word. The enemy had decided to retreat, and now was the time to beat a drowning dog. Yang Qindong pulled out the saber at his waist and loudly said to the 5,000 cavalrymen beside him, "Soldiers, it's time to perform a meritorious service. Pass down my order, pursue and beat the Tatar cavalrymen. Beat the Tatar cavalrymen." The roar was like a tsunami, followed by the movement of thousands of horses. The torches were lit again and held in their hands. Other than a small number of soldiers who stayed behind to guard the camp, the rest of the cavalry let out a loud roar and all of them patted their horses and madly galloped toward the Tatar camp. The Tatar cavalrymen who were retreating step by step according to the plan suddenly saw countless torches coming from the front. The torches were getting closer and closer and they panicked for a moment. General Suhi, who was commanding the army, was also shocked by the scene in front of him. His first thought was that his plan had been exposed and the enemy knew about it. Things are not good. You follow me. The rest of you quickly retreat. I will catch up with you later. As expected of Agar Dorji's #1 general, Suhi quickly calmed down and quickly gathered the 3,000 cavalrymen to stay behind to cover the retreat. The situation was too sudden and it was useless to say anything. At this time they needed time to retreat. Suhi stepped forward bravely, holding the bow and arrow he often used, and shouted to the 3,000 cavalrymen behind him, "Follow me and use the bow and arrow to counterattack, and suppress the enemy's momentum." 3,000 cavalrymen and 3,000 arrows, under the simultaneous attack, the battle formation was very shocking. At least in Suhi's opinion, it would not be a problem to hold on for a while. The rest of the Tatar army quickly retreated. Suhi led the 3,000 cavalrymen and waited for the mercenaries to come closer. When the first torches were less than 200 meters away, Suhi took the initiative to draw his bow and shouted, "Everyone follow me and counterattack with the bow and arrow. Fire!" Suddenly, arrows were shot out like rain, heading straight for the mercenaries coming from afar. Wherever they shot there were torches. This seemed to have become a target marker, allowing everyone to find the direction of their attacks in the dark. Ding ding dang dang. The arrows fell like a dense rain and from time to time, the torches would suddenly stop and fall to the ground. Under such a dense counterattack of arrows, many of the mercenaries were shot down from their horses. However, there were still more cavalrymen who rushed over. The ones in the lead were the black-armored cavalrymen, who were led by Yang Qindong and more than 100 guards. Taking the lead on the battlefield not only gave a strong motivation to the soldiers below, but also improved their morale. On the battlefield, the actions of a general could indeed lead the army to have a more positive effect. Relying on the protection of his heavy armor, he ignored the enemy's arrows and allowed them to land on his body, creating clanking sounds. Soon he closed the distance of 200 meters. Then he brandished his saber and killed the Tatar cavalrymen on their horses. Turn around, retreat while fighting. Su He, who already knew the strength of the mercenary cavalry, knew that if he directly went up to fight with them, it would be difficult for the 3,000 cavalrymen, including himself, to escape alive. The only thing he could do now was to retreat while fighting. Only then could he see more chances of survival. So he kept retreating, and the 3,000 Tatar cavalrymen also fought and retreated with him. However, the drawbacks of doing this were also very big. If they didn't form a sufficient defensive line, they wouldn't be able to resist the attack of the mercenaries. In such a retreat, the losses of the Tatar cavalrymen were naturally great. After a few exchanges, about 500 cavalrymen's corpses were left behind. Retreat quickly, use the arrows to counterattack while retreating. Knowing that if this continued, the 3,000 cavalrymen would be eaten sooner or later, Su He anxiously shouted. The Tatar cavalrymen were very obedient, or it could be said that they were very disciplined on the battlefield. After hearing Su He's words, they turned around and fled. While fleeing, they used the arrows from time to counterattack. In this way, the original cavalry charge evolved into a chase. At this moment, the archers on both sides displayed their ability to fight on horseback. Arrows flew back and forth, and it was very lively. Chapter 7:17. However, even if it was a clash of bows and arrows, there was still the matter of who was the main attacker and who was the auxiliary attacker. As the chase continued, it was clear that the mercenaries who were charging in from the front had an advantage. The Tatar cavalry who were constantly retreating had suffered losses, and the number of cavalry had been sharply decreasing. Fortunately, the sky was completely dark at this time. If it was daytime, the losses would be even greater. However, the night also had its disadvantages. As they continuously retreated, the formation of the Tatar cavalry was already extremely chaotic. Some of the cavalry had run off to who knows where, making it impossible for them to form an effective defensive formation. They were unable to form a dense net like the mercenaries once they launched an arrow attack. As they kept retreating and the formation was in chaos, the Tatar cavalry's counterattack with bows and arrows no longer had the ability to deter them. They could only passively take a beating. In the end, even General Su He himself separated from the main force with only a dozen soldiers. He still wanted to gather the scattered soldiers, but he didn't know where to find them. He sighed inwardly at his brother's good luck and could only lead the dozen or so personal guards to chase in the direction of the main force. The 3,000 Tatar cavalry were defeated just like that. Apart from the initial threat of the arrows, they didn't put up any decent resistance. From start to finish, they only delayed Yang Qindong's troops for a little more than 2 hours. The main force of the mercenaries once again entered the process of chasing the enemy. During this time, the main force of the Tatar cavalry didn't run very far. This was because not long after they escaped from the southern forest under the leadership of Lord Agar Dorje, they encountered the Tiger's Man Independent Regiment and the Windchaser Regiment that were responsible for ambushing and blocking. The two regiments were ordered to guard the retreat of the Tatar cavalry. Just as they began to set up the battlefield and ambush, they saw many figures in the distance. The main force of the Tatar cavalry was rushing over. Attack! Tiger's Man didn't even have time to dig up the mines. He led his 3 gun brigades to launch a frontal assault on the retreating Tatar cavalry. The sudden gunshots, the dense gunshots without any warning, and the whistling of the flames that could be seen in the darkness, instantly disrupted the formation of the retreating Tatar cavalry. After a series of gunshots, at least a few hundred riders died on their horses, and over 1,000 were injured to varying degrees. Seeing the firearm battalion of the mercenaries here, Agar Dorje, who was following the army, naturally turned pale with fright. What he was more worried about wasn't how much of an attack he had suffered. He was more worried about why there were so many mercenaries here. Shouldn't they have been pinned down by General Glenn's headquarters on the northern slope of the West River? Could it be that their appearance here meant that something had already happened on both sides? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Agar Dorji felt uneasy. When the Kiliarchs came to ask for instructions, he actually didn't have a definite idea. Speaking of which, Agar Dorji's military talent wasn't very good. It was only because he was born into a good family and had followed his elder brother Tuachuo Buhua since he was young that he gradually began to master the military. When it came to controlling people's hearts, he might have some methods, but when it came to commanding on the battlefield, his ability was far inferior. In his confusion, Agar Dorji, who didn't have much military talent to begin with, didn't have any better ideas. Faced with the instructions of his junior generals, he could only order the army to charge through the enemy's defensive line. Only in this way could they have a chance to escape. Without a strict organization, the Tatar cavalry charged in 1,000-men formation. However, facing Tiger's Man's 3-gun brigades, 7 cavalry brigades, and more than 2,000 cavalry from the Windchaser group, such a charge naturally caused heavy losses. The battle lasted for more than 2 hours. Apart from about 3,000 cavalry that managed to break through the encirclement, the rest of the Tatar cavalry were still trapped here, unable to escape. It was at this time that General Suhi rushed over with 12 soldiers. Agar Dorji, who was at his wits' end, was overjoyed when he heard the news and wanted to hand over the command of the army to him. However, when the two met, General Suhi's head was already covered in cold sweat. The first sentence he said made Agar Dorji feel as if the heavens wanted to kill him. "Sir, behind me is the main force of the mercenaries. This time, with 2 sides surrounding us, I'm afraid that the army won't be able to escape destruction so fast." Hearing that the main force of the mercenaries was coming from behind, Agar Dorji felt as if the world was spinning and he couldn't see any hope. In contrast, Suhi was much calmer. Although the current situation was very difficult, it wasn't that they didn't have any advantages. For example, their current total military strength was higher than the enemy's. For example, it was now night and they were better at escaping. Of course, even if they had more military strength than the enemy, Suhi wasn't arrogant enough to think that they could achieve a full counterattack and achieve victory. The continuous escape had caused the army to lose the most important morale. To put it more harshly, the morale of the army might collapse at any time. Once that happened, there was no doubt that they would lose. Although Agar Dorji had many faults such as being greedy, cowardly, bullying the weak, and fearing the strong, in any case this person was still his superior. If Agar didn't put him in an important position, he wouldn't be where he was today. At this moment, Suhi made up his mind to repay Agar Dorji. "Your Excellency, it is impossible to turn the tables now. You can only escape and hope that you can rise again to take revenge for what happened today," Suhi said as if she had made some kind of decision. When he made this decision, he was also prepared to sacrifice himself at any time. Agar Dorji was shocked by Suhi's decision. He was a little touched and asked, "If I leave, what about you, General?" "Meh. Of course I'll stay and lead the army to fight the mercenaries. If I don't do that, I'm afraid that you won't be able to take the opportunity to escape." Suhi smiled bitterly. Who didn't want to live? But when he was destined to sacrifice others, he could only choose to stay. After all, the other party was Agar Dorji and he was only a general under him. Agar Dorji of course knew this truth. At this moment he was extremely excited and angry. He was excited because Suhi was willing to sacrifice him to protect himself. He was angry because this battle had cost them everything. From now on he could no longer be a powerful force on the prairie. The glory of the past had nothing to do with him. Regardless of what he thought, Agar Dorji finally agreed to Suhi's request and chose to leave. At this time he really handed over the command of the army to Suhi. He only left 3,000 elite cavalrymen with him to break out of the encirclement. After Suhi got the command, the first thing she did was to let the soldiers around her spread the news that General Gulang of the North Slope and Hala Rua of the West River were coming here. As long as they could hold on until dawn, the army would come to support them and turn the tide. Of course this was impossible. According to Suhi's judgment, it was very likely that the two armies had met with mishap. Otherwise, where would the mercenaries find the strength to intercept him here? But he still had to tell the public this. Only then would the morale of the army not be in chaos and not collapse, creating a chance for Agar Dorji to escape. Sure enough, Suhi's strategy was correct. After the news was released, the originally chaotic Tatar cavalry calmed down a lot. People were afraid of having no hope. As long as there was hope, anyone would think of a way to fight for it. The morale of the army was temporarily stabilized. Suhi commanded the army to form a defensive line to block the attacks of the mercenaries behind him. At the same time, he sent 2,000 cavalrymen to charge at the mercenaries blocking the road. He wanted to tear a hole in the front in the shortest time possible to create a chance for Agar Dorji to escape. With the morale of the army stabilized, the orders were carried out seriously by the cavalrymen below. When Yang Chendong brought the main army to the rear of the Tatar cavalry, it was not as easy as expected. Instead, it was met with strong resistance. What's going on? Yang Chendong saw that many of the mercenaries were too careless and rushed too quickly. As soon as they entered the defensive line of the Tatar cavalry, they were submerged. In a short period of time, they lost hundreds of cavalrymen. He ordered his men to stop the attack and called over the scouts to ask about the situation. The battalion commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunxing, had already joined the army at this moment. When he was called over by Yang Chendong for questioning, he told him what he saw. Sixth young master, the Tatar cavalry was indeed in chaos before, but because of the arrival of Su He, the situation changed. I don't know why they stabilized the morale of the army and had the power to fight back. After all, the time it happened was too short. It was already very difficult for the reconnaissance battalion to obtain this information. Yang Chendong did not mean to blame the other party. Instead, he asked with interest, after Su He came back, the morale of the army stabilized? It seems that this person has some ability. Yes, we learned from some of the prisoners that the order to retreat was also given by this person. It seems that his insight on the battlefield is also good. Beta Persei added. Haha, then I am interested in this person. Yang Chendong laughed. Now was the time to use people. If the other party was really capable, then he did not mind recruiting him for his own use. It was just that the enemy had not been defeated yet. It was a bit too early to think about this. Like this, give the order. Don't rush to attack. When the army arrives, launch a fierce attack in units of battalions and companies. We need to advance in all directions. We can't do any individual breakthroughs. Also, the reconnaissance battalion must immediately figure out the situation and allow you to see the prisoners freely. Yang Chendong was not willing to fight a battle that he was not confident in. At least, he would not rashly launch a fierce attack before he figured out what was going on in the enemy camp. Chapter 7:18. Beta Persei and Su Yunxing went to carry out the order. Soon, the mercenaries' attack changed from the previous random attacks to an organized advance. As a result, the Tatar cavalry fell into a situation where they were forced to retreat step by step. It was beyond Su He's expectation that the mercenaries behind him reacted so quickly. He guessed that there might be a general in the enemy's camp who knew more about tactics and was commanding them. But now he was not concerned about this. He was more concerned about whether the 2,000 cavalrymen he sent would be able to open a bloody path for Lord Agar Dorji to escape. Under the command of death, the 2,000 Tatar cavalrymen launched a suicidal attack. They were not afraid of the bullets and mercenaries who were several times their number. They just lowered their heads and charged forward. This kind of desperate fighting style finally allowed them to tear open a hole, giving Lord Agar Dorji an escape route. The 3,000 Tatar cavalrymen who were also carrying hope left the group. In addition to the ones who fled before, there were already 6,000 to 7,000 Tatar cavalrymen who rushed out. The Tatar cavalry paid a price. Of the 2,000 cavalrymen sent out, apart from those who died in battle or were captured, none of them returned to the barracks. Phew! Su He breathed a long sigh of relief. Her heart, which had been hanging high before, was relieved. Now that Agar Dorji had escaped, his only worry was gone. The next step was to fight a bloody battle with the mercenaries. He would use his death to prove that the Tatar cavalry was not to be trifled with. At this time, nearly 2 hours had passed since Yang Chendong summoned Su Yunxing. In an hour, the sky would be bright. At this time, Battalion Commander Su finally learned from the captives that Su He was able to unify the troops and quickly reported it to the 6th young master. Oh, this Su He actually came up with such an idea. He really has some ability. After listening to Su Yunxing's story, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. This Su He was really a capable person. Previously, he didn't know how the other party did it, so he could only win step by step. But now that he knew the method the other party used, he only needed to find a way to counter it. How about this? Pass down my orders. Everyone stop attacking and wait for daybreak. Once the enemy attacks, the musketeers will be at the front and the archers will be at the back, suppressing them from breaking through. This was not the result that Yang Chendong wanted to see. Since that was the case, he would just surround them and not attack. What he wanted now was not to destroy them but to conquer them. The mercenaries suddenly stopped their fierce attacks, and the front line became quiet. This scene caught Su-hee, who was in the midst of the final battle, off guard. When he heard that there were no more sounds of killing coming from outside, he didn't know why, but he had a bad feeling. General, could it be that they are preparing for a big attack? Some Kiliarchs who were also confused came to Su-hee and asked for instructions. Someone asked, "General, it's almost dawn. When will our reinforcements arrive?" That's right. The soldiers below are looking forward to it. After a night of fighting, everyone is tired and suffered heavy losses. The soldiers below are very nervous. Su-hee obviously couldn't say that there were no reinforcements at all. Otherwise the army would lose their morale and be unable to fight. In order to stabilize the situation, he could only continue to make arrangements. It's not far from dawn. The reinforcements should be here soon. What we need to do now is to accumulate strength. Once the reinforcements arrive, we will attack from the inside and outside and completely defeat the mercenaries. Hearing Su-hee's certainty, the Kiliarchs below couldn't help but smile with joy. They immediately agreed that they would do their best to stabilize the morale of the army before leaving. Su-hee, who was left behind, was puzzled. Could it be that the mercenaries were really preparing to launch a big attack? If that was the case, he had already decided to lead the army to fight to the death. When the time came, even if he died in battle, he would be able to deal a huge blow to the mercenaries. He wouldn't have lived in vain. But what if the other party wasn't going to attack? What if they had other plans? What should he do then? He looked up at the sky, although it was still so dark. However, Su-hee knew that the sky would brighten in 2 hours. In other words, there wasn't much time left for him to fight. Su-hee knew that he was going to die. He wanted to fight a bloody battle with the mercenaries and die on the battlefield with the dignity of a soldier. Unfortunately, the mercenaries didn't act according to his plan. They suddenly stopped attacking and just surrounded him from afar. This gave Su-hee a bad feeling in his heart. As the saying goes, what you are afraid of will come true. Just when Su-hee was wondering if the other party had figured out her plan, suddenly there was a shout from the front line. The voice that only belonged to the Han people came clearly at this moment. "Brothers of the Tatar cavalry, you have been fooled. You won't have any reinforcements at all. No matter Hala Ruachu of the Shiha Regiment or Jelong of the North Slope Regiment, they have been defeated by our mercenaries. We even captured Hala Ruachu alive. Now you are all alone. Surrender immediately. Otherwise you will only die and it won't be worth it. Tatar cavalry brothers, you have been fooled. We won't have any reinforcements no matter." The shout came one after another. It was transmitted to the Tatar army through the simple loudspeakers. When the cavalrymen heard the news for the first time, they all looked at each other with ugly and angry expressions. Their faces were ugly because of the situation they were in. They were angry because they knew that they were fooled. For a moment, the camp was like a nest that exploded. No matter how hard the Kiliarchs tried, they couldn't suppress it anymore. Left with no choice, these Kiliarchs could only band together and come to Su-hee to ask for an explanation. Su-hee didn't panic like everyone thought. Instead, he rode on his horse calmly. Looking at the angry Kiliarchs, he lowered his head and admitted his mistake. "I'm sorry everyone. I lied before. We might really have no reinforcements." "What? Really no reinforcements? If that's the case, what should we do next? Without reinforcements, we won't be a match for the mercenaries." "That's right. What should we do? General Su, please come up with a plan." The Kiliarchs all talked at once. Facing Su-hee, who admitted everything, they suddenly realized that they weren't that angry. After all, he didn't take the opportunity to escape. Instead, he stayed here like everyone else. With this, they couldn't vent their anger. First, Su-hee calmed the Kiliarchs down. Then he talked about how to deal with the mercenaries. "Brothers, it's obvious that the mercenaries want to use psychological tactics to win without a fight. If that's the case, we'll all become their prisoners. We'll even live a life worse than death. Since that's the case, why don't we give it a try? Maybe we'll have a chance to survive. Even if I can't escape and die on the battlefield, I can die a happy death and be a hero." "General, you mean?" The Kiliarchs had already guessed what Su-hee was going to do next. "I mean, let's give it a try and kill our way out. Let's leave it to fate." Su-hee also knew that at this moment he could only tell the truth. Only then would they have a chance to live. Breaking out of the encirclement wasn't an easy thing to do. Most people might even lose their lives here. But as Su-hee said, if they didn't do this, they didn't have any better choice now. These Kiliarchs looked at each other and finally nodded helplessly. After getting the support of these Kiliarchs, Suhi immediately gave the order for the entire army to charge out under the cover of the moonlight. After the order was given, the Tatar cavalry who were still doubting whether they were tricked were speechless by General Suhi's sincerity. Although they were angry, they didn't want to be captives. They didn't even dare to imagine what life would be like as captives. They could only try their best and hope that the heavens would take care of them and let them live. Every single one of them held on to the hope that they could survive. One by one, they unsheathed their cavalry sabers. Taking advantage of the fact that the sky had yet to brighten, they charged out to kill. When the hundreds and thousands of Tatar cavalry charged out, their battle formation was quite large. The moment the earth shook, the Tiger's Man Independent Regiment guarding the outermost perimeter felt it. As the regiment commander, Tiger's Man immediately ordered the 3 battalions of musketeers to get ready. At the same time, he ordered the soldiers who were burying the mines to retreat and prepare for battle. Behind the Independent Regiment, the Windchaser Division that reinforced the 1st Regiment of Cavalry also prepared their bows and arrows, ready to fire at any time when the enemy approached. More and more Tatar cavalrymen were charging towards them. They seemed to have understood their situation. If their first charge was fruitless, then it would be even more difficult for them to come up with a good result. This time, the number of cavalrymen charging towards them increased, and their speed was also very fast. Although it was night, the earth was shaking, giving people the feeling that thousands of men and horses were bravely charging through a single plank bridge. Because of this, many of the mercenaries' expressions became very cold. Some of the soldiers even had cold sweat coming out of their palms. Sensing the nervousness of the soldiers, Tiger Edge, who had always been by Yang Qindong's side and had developed the aura of a general, laughed out loud. "Everyone, don't panic. We are well prepared. The enemy won't be able to rush over." As if to prove his words, a deafening explosion suddenly rang out. Streaks of fire soared into the sky and dyed the originally dark night. It actually lit up the eyes of the soldiers, allowing them to clearly see everything that was happening in front of them. Chapter 7:19. In the end, the Tatar cavalry still managed to rush into the landmines, triggering lightning and fire, sending countless enemy cavalry into the sky. After the landmines exploded, the fragments flew into the bodies of many Tatar cavalrymen, making them look like hedgehogs, screaming and wailing in pain. Under this kind of attack, the Tatar cavalry that rushed quickly became the target of the attack. Some of the cavalry at the front didn't even have time to shout before they were swallowed up by the ruthless power of the landmines. The powerful landmines caused the Tatar cavalry to involuntarily stop in their tracks. Their faces were pale as they looked forward. Their hearts were filled with complex feelings, but they were unable to speak. Fire. With the help of the monstrous flames, Tiger's Man noticed that many Tatar cavalry had stopped 500 meters in front of them. He made a prompt decision and gave the order to fire. He knew that at this time, if he gave the enemy a heavy blow, it would be the last straw. It would play an extremely important role in deterring the enemy. With a loud shout, the 3 battalions fired at the same time. Although in the darkness, the accuracy of these auxiliary soldiers was greatly reduced, but the number of Tatar cavalry was large enough. Coupled with the fact that they weren't prepared at all, a burst of gunshots rang out. Who knew how many Tatar cavalry fell from their horses? First, the landmines sent people into the sky, then the firearms easily took people's lives. Under this kind of pressure, the Tatar cavalry had no choice but to retreat one by one. Originally, it seemed that the first attack with great momentum was fruitless. On the contrary, it was a big blow to their morale. After the failure of the assault, when most of the cavalry returned, many of them had a pessimistic expression on their faces. Many of them were already scared. In this kind of situation where they couldn't even see how many enemies there were and where they were, many of their brothers had died. This kind of fighting style really made them unable to see any hope of victory. After Suhi learned about the situation at the front line, he couldn't say a word for a long time. He knew that the situation might be worse than he imagined. If they couldn't rush out, then wouldn't it mean that they could only choose to surrender? The battlefield once again fell into silence. The mercenaries' voices came again. It was still the same words as before, but compared to before, this time some people began to be moved. The curses were also much less than before. The persuasion continued and the sky finally began to brighten. After their vision returned to normal, the Tatar cavalry only felt more despair. In this kind of situation where their every move was clearly seen by the enemy, it would naturally be much more difficult for them to escape. At dawn, the persuasion continued, but the mercenaries didn't take a step forward. They also didn't rely on the advantage of the firearms in their hands to attack. Instead they began to cook. Smoke spirals, and not long after, the aroma of meat. Young master, our logistics camp chefs are all here. They are still using the condiments produced in Crimson City. Along with the freshly slaughtered meat, it will definitely be fragrant. Yang Er walked in front of Yang Qindong as if he was presenting a treasure, looking for praise. Very good. Yang Qindong nodded with satisfaction. While looking at the Tatar cavalry camp, he said, "Food is the most important thing to the people. The temptation of food can often achieve the goal of invincibility." Yang Qindong's guess was right. Using food to lure the enemy had proven to be very useful. In the past, the mercenaries had often used this trick to destroy the enemy's morale. This time it was also successful. Yesterday afternoon, before the sky turned dark, they had eaten dinner. Now it had been nearly 12 hours. During their escape, because the mercenaries were chasing closely behind them, some of the pots and bowls of food they brought along were thrown away halfway. They thought that they could kill their way out before dawn, so no one was worried about this matter. But now, after dawn, many of the cavalry's stomachs began to growl. Although many of them had a certain amount of dry food on them, it was absolutely not a problem for them to survive for at least 2 or 3 days. But the problem was that was cold food. How could it be compared to hot food that was overflowing with the aroma of meat? After using the MSG and other things produced by Chicken City, the taste was particularly delicious. Saying that the aroma would spread for 10 miles might be an exaggeration, but with the morning breeze, it would not be a problem for it to spread for 2 to 3 miles on the open ground. When the aroma spread to the Tatar cavalry camp, many of the cavalry's expressions became somewhat abnormal. Especially those who were preparing to take out their dry food, their expressions became even more unsightly. Comparing people to people would lead to death, and comparing goods would lead to throwing away. Compared to the aroma of the fresh meat, the cold dry food was too tasteless. At this time, the voice urging them to surrender sounded again. Among them there were some words about food. For example, the mercenaries promised that as long as they surrendered, they would immediately be able to eat fresh meat. At that time they would be able to eat hot flatbread and drink meat soup. It would definitely be a delicacy. The picture outlined made many of the cavalry unable to help but make a swallowing motion. Then, the soldiers looked at each other as if they were somewhat tempted. "Hello everyone, my name is Hulu, an authentic Mongolian. In a battle, I became a captive of the mercenaries. I originally thought that my life would be worse than death. But who would have thought that not only would I be able to live a better life and receive more money every month, I would also become a commander of 1,000 soldiers. The reason why I am telling you all this is to tell you that the reason why we gave up our homes and fought with our blood and flesh is because we want to live a better life. Right now the opportunity is in front of you. As long as everyone surrenders to the mercenaries like me, as long as you have the ability, you do not have to worry about not being valued. This is the most realistic experience of a surrendered commander of 1,000 soldiers. Hello everyone, my name is Taimu a Nuzan cavalry. It was also in a battle that I became a captive of the mercenaries. Similarly, I am now a commander of a battalion. Now I can save up a lot of money every month. Not only is my food better than before, my clothes are also better than before. Once this war is over, I can find a beautiful girl from the grassland and start a family. Then, I will have a bunch of children and live a life where I will not have to worry about food and drink. Hello everyone, my name is Lu Dai and I am also a Nuzan. I'm also a captive. Previously, I was a deputy Qianhu in Baiming's new Urgan Dusi region. Now that I am a deputy commander, my treatment is more than 10 times better than before. Come quickly, there is delicious food that can strengthen our bodies. There are even sharper and more durable cavalry swords. There are also more high positions waiting for you. As long as everyone is willing to work hard, your future is limitless. Hello everyone, my name is Yi La, and I was originally a Qianhu in Baiming's new Urgan Dusi region. Now I am a commander of the Nuzan cavalry. After coming to the mercenaries, the most authentic experience I have had is that they have the best military treatment in the world. They have the strongest weapons in the world. They also have the most generous rewards in the world. As long as you are here, as long as you can mount a horse and kill the enemy, as long as you are sincere enough, this place will become the paradise you have always dreamed of. Come, we welcome you. One by one, the officers stepped forward to share their experiences. They expressed their views on the mercenaries and their own experiences from different perspectives. They did not speak of any great principles, but the more simple their words were, the more they could gain the approval of the ordinary cavalry. They could resonate with them. As the voices of these officers reached the Tatar camp, The expressions of many of the cavalry changed. They were eager to move. It was as if they were only missing an opportunity to stand up and choose to surrender. The Kiliarchs who were in charge of them naturally felt this change. They all anxiously went to General Su-he, hoping that he could think of a solution that would satisfy both sides. However, Su-he did not say anything. He only looked at the sky helplessly and shook his head. Everyone had the right to choose their own way of life and their own future. He could not interfere. In fact, he could not interfere either. Otherwise, if he forcefully suppressed them, it would cause a mutiny. On the contrary, if these soldiers could have a good way out, he would be happy. Forget it. Since that is the case, let's send some of the injured soldiers to them first. It is also good to see if these mercenaries are true to their words. If they are, you can choose to surrender in order to live a better life. If not, then we'll fight them to the death. At worst, we'll just die. Hearing Su-he's words, all the Kiliarchs were speechless. However, they could not refute it. Could they say that the general was wrong? Could it be that it was wrong for a general to find a way out for his soldiers? No one objected and they could not object. After the order was passed down, some of the wounded Tatar cavalry became the first batch of captives to be sent to the mercenaries. Then everyone watched helplessly as the mercenaries dispatched a lot of troops. They used a stretcher to carry the Tatar cavalry away from the battlefield. At this moment, some people were envious of the injured soldiers. It seemed that only the wounded could openly defect to the enemy without being blamed by anyone. There were still calls to surrender from time to time, but as time passed, no one knew if the Tatar cavalry had become numb or if there were orders from above. In short, no one saw any uninjured cavalry choose to surrender. Chapter 720. Time passed little by little. When it was noon, the smell of meat came from afar. Along with it came another trump card. Some of the injured Tatar cavalrymen were sent back to the center of the battlefield. Brothers, I'm Gushan. I'm sure many of you know me. I was injured by an arrow and couldn't ride a horse, so I was sent to the mercenaries as a captive. A Tatar cavalryman on a horse shouted. Such a shout quickly caused a burst of discussion in the Tatar camp. That person is indeed Gushan. His hometown is not far from mine, so I know him. He is Gushan. He was originally with me. Even if he turned into ashes, I would still recognize him. I just didn't expect that when we left this morning he couldn't get on a horse, but now he can ride a horse. Immediately, several Tatar cavalrymen took the initiative to testify, proving Gushan's true identity. After his identity was confirmed, Gushan's words were more credible. When he talked about his experience, everyone naturally chose to listen carefully. After listening to his story, they also knew what happened to him in the mercenaries. In Gushan's own words, although he was a captive, he was different from a captive. Since he and his injured companions came to the mercenaries, they were immediately surrounded by a group of medical officers called military doctors. Then all kinds of examinations, all kinds of treatment, all kinds of medicine, and all kinds of methods were used. After the treatment, hot meat soup and flatbread were served in front of him. The people who surrounded him were also Mongolian men. Through the conversation, he knew that the Mongolian soldiers in front of him were not fake. Through the conversation, he gained a deeper understanding of the mercenary army system, and he also gained a deeper understanding of how the soldiers were treated. Gushan was a person who could speak. After he saw that many people were listening to him carefully, he bluntly announced that the treatment of soldiers was soldiers was 10 taels of silver a month. Soldiers were 15 taels of silver a month. The so-called B soldiers were the second-line troops with weaker fighting ability. The S soldiers were naturally the first-line troops with tyrannical strength. When this treatment was announced, it immediately attracted the attention of the Tatar cavalrymen who were listening carefully. The Tatar cavalrymen were only paid 2 taels of silver a month. Of course, if there was a war, there would still be some extra benefits. For example, they could keep a portion of the things they looted. The military merits they obtained could also be exchanged for a portion of silver taels. But even so, on average, the amount of silver they received each month was still limited. It was far from being as generous as the salary of the mercenaries. Not to mention, according to what Gushan had heard, once the mercenaries were involved in a war, their rewards would only be greater. For example, if you killed an enemy on the battlefield, you could get a reward of 1 to 10 taels of silver. This also depended on who you killed. Hearing this, the Tatar cavalrymen's eyes revealed excitement and even yearning. The cavalry here were all Tatar elites. In terms of combat ability, they were more powerful than the Tatar cavalry at the West River and the North Slope. All capable people were conceited. Things like military exploits were as easy as eating a meal in their hands. Who wouldn't be tempted when they heard that they could receive so many rewards for their military service? The so-called capable people needed a platform to display their abilities, and the mercenary group was obviously a very good platform to display their abilities. It made the hearts of the capable people yearn for it. Speaking of the treatment of the Mongol cavalrymen, although their ability to march and fight was very strong, due to the constraints of the environment, they did not seem to have much creativity other than fighting and herding. Because of this, their treatment had always been very poor. It was even worse than the Baiming army, the original Nuzan tribe, and the Mongol tribe in Narcissus town. The price they paid was not proportional to the benefits they received. This made many of the Tatar cavalrymen resentful. But when they thought about how everyone was like this on the Mongolian grassland, they slowly balanced out. But balance did not mean that they had truly accepted it. They still wanted to prove themselves and improve their treatment. After all, with money they could do many things. This was something that everyone knew. Why did the Mongol cavalrymen always like to plunder? It would not take long for them to think of attacking the Central Plains. Wasn't it because they were too poor? Everyone knew that the Central Plains was vast with abundant resources. The people there were also very rich. If they did not target them, who else would they target? Although many people would die in every war, compared to the benefits, the risk was worth it. But now they did not need to go out of the grassland to plunder others. They could also receive good treatment. This was equivalent to having benefits in front of them. How many people would not be tempted? How many people would be able to ignore it? At this time, it was not only the ordinary Tatar cavalrymen. Some of the Tatar centurions and Kiliarchs were also tempted. Gu Shan had just said that an ordinary soldier's monthly salary was at least 10 taels of silver. As a small general they would receive even more. If they followed this treatment and worked in the mercenary army for a few years, wouldn't they have enough money to marry a wife, build a house, and buy sheep and horses? If they really had money and a happy and comfortable life, who would want to go to war and take risks? Gu Shan's appearance made many people have a better understanding of the mercenary army and yearn for it. In the following time, more Tatar cavalrymen like Gu Shan who had been treated with minor injuries were released. They came to the center of the two armies and began to help spread the benefits of the mercenary army. One person's words might not be credible, but what about 10 people, 100 people, or more? Not to mention that the original words were true, with so many people saying the same thing, even if it was false, it would become true. As more and more of their original companions came forward to speak, gradually, no one doubted the truth of the matter. On the contrary, everyone's eyes were full of stars, imagining the various benefits after joining the mercenary army. Gu Shan and the others were sent out because they had received a certain promise from the mercenary army. For example, the so-called Mercenary Logistics Battalion commander Beta Persei, who was in charge of receiving them, said that as long as they helped persuade the Tatar cavalrymen, once they chose to surrender, not only would they receive a reward of 100 taels of silver for their military service, but after their injuries were healed, their ability would be tested first and they would be able to enter the Acor. Even if it was for themselves, Gu Shan and the others would go all out and do their best to praise the mercenary army to the best of their ability. Their efforts finally paid off. Under the extreme temptation of words, finally a bold Tatar cavalryman walked out of the camp and came to the center of the two armies, expressing his willingness to surrender to the mercenary army. His appearance was naturally welcomed by Gu Shan and the others. In the warm applause, the mercenary army also sent out 2 battalions of soldiers to welcome him. Immediately, a special person came forward to register. The officer in charge of the reception also praised the Tatar cavalryman for daring to be the first to come forward. He said that if this person performed well, he would be given more consideration for his promotion. With such a living example in front of them, the other Tatar cavalrymen finally couldn't help but take the initiative to stand out. They scrambled to be the first, as if they were afraid that all the benefits would be taken away by others if they were late. More and more Tatar cavalrymen chose to surrender. They put down their weapons, jumped off their horses, and joined the mercenary army. Because of this, the tension of the previous war slowly disappeared. So much so that the originally tense string was also relaxed. There were also examples of centurions and Kiliarchs joining the mercenary army. In the main camp of the Tatar cavalry, Suhi stood at the entrance of the large tent. He looked at everything that was happening in front of him from afar and was speechless for a long time. There was no expression on his face. He couldn't tell if he was happy or disappointed. Suhi's mood was indeed a bit complicated. You could say that he was happy. So many of his brothers had a way to live, so he was naturally happy. But at the same time he was worried that the mercenary army would not treat his brothers well. Since they had surrendered, it was the same as fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. If all of this was fake, then what should he do? Under such a worried mood, Gu Shan, who had done his best to talk, crossed the line between the two armies and arrived in front of Su He. This was deliberately requested by Su He. He wanted to contact Gu Shan alone and use his experience to judge whether what Gu Shan said was true or false. Seeing that Gu Shan had arrived, he calmly turned around and walked into the large tent. He spat out a sentence, "Come with me." Gu Shan was naturally cautious and even a little nervous. After all, he was just an ordinary Tatar cavalryman. It was impossible for him to meet a general like Su He who commanded tens of thousands of troops. But now they could actually meet alone. It was imaginable how his mentality had changed. As soon as he entered the tent, it was incomparably cold. Su He turned his head and said casually, "Sit anywhere." "Thank you, General. I'm used to standing." Gu Shan was still very aware of his identity. He didn't sit down but stood respectfully at the side. Su He saw Gu Shan's performance, but he didn't say anything. Instead he sat down and asked casually, "Tell me everything you saw after going to the mercenary camp and the benefits they promised you. Remember, don't lie. If I find out, you'll never be able to walk out of this tent." There wasn't the slightest anger in his voice, and there wasn't even the slightest murderous intent. However, these words brought a lot of pressure to Gu Shan, so much so that he suddenly broke out in cold sweat. It also gave him a feeling that it was best not to lie in front of General Su He. Otherwise he would definitely lose his life here. Chapter 721. "Yes, General, I will report truthfully." Gu Shan said very sincerely, then he recounted everything that happened when he entered the mercenary camp in detail. He even told Beta Persei about the things that he promised him. "General, I didn't say a single lie. Everything I said is true. I also saw our mercenary Tatar soldiers in the previous battle in the barracks. Most of them were treated well. Although they were locked in military tents, they were not beaten, scolded, or reprimanded. They even had a fixed time to come out every day. And once some of them were willing to surrender, they would immediately be separated and receive better treatment. Even those soldiers who did not make a choice for the time being would be able to eat their fill for 3 meals and would not go hungry." Su He nodded from time to time as he listened carefully to Gu Shan's detailed account of everything he saw. He could feel that Gu Shan was not lying. He had interrupted several times and then asked the previous questions again. The answers he got were the same. There was no difference. He learned more about the mercenary army from Gu Shan's mouth. He also knew that his soldiers were doing well. He could finally rest assured. He slowly closed his eyes, then waved his hand and said, "Very good, thank you for telling me so much. You can leave now." Gu Shan, who could leave, did not immediately move. Instead, he took the initiative to say after struggling in his heart, "General, don't you choose to join the mercenary army? They are indeed treated well, and their mental outlook is not worse than our Tatar cavalry." Don't say any more. Otherwise, you will only force me to change my mind about not killing you. You can leave now." Although he did not say anything more, Su He had already expressed his determination with practical actions. That is, others can surrender but he will not. No matter what, he was a general who once commanded tens of thousands of cavalry. How could he choose to surrender in exchange for a new life? At this point, Su He was about to get angry. By right, this should be the time for Gu Shan to leave. However, he still didn't move. Instead, after a moment of hesitation, he suddenly said, "General, the mercenaries hope to see you join them. They even promised you the opportunity to lead an army alone after you join them. He also said that if you don't go, young Master Haraluo's life will be in danger." Listening to Gu Shan's noisy words, Su He was about to get angry. Was his expression not clear and specific enough? Why was the other party still trying to persuade him? He had to show the other party some power. Just as he was about to punish Gu Shan, he suddenly heard the last sentence. When he heard Hararuo's name, his originally closed eyes suddenly opened. "What did you say? Farak is still alive, how is he now?" Su He finally reacted, which made Gu Shan breathe a sigh of relief. Before coming, Beta Persei told him that if possible, he could help persuade Su He. For this he even wrote him a letter. But Beta Persei also said that this mission could be abandoned. After all, it was too dangerous. No one would blame him if he didn't complete it. Of course, if he completed it well, there would be additional rewards and so on. On the way to see Suhi, Gushan thought a lot. In the end he decided to give it a try. This was not only because of the generous rewards, but also because of a more important reason. He respected General Suhi very much and didn't want to see the general die because he didn't surrender. So he finally mustered up the courage to give it a try. Now it seems that he finally made the right bet. Gushan happily took out the letter from his arms and handed it to Suhi. General, this is a letter from the mercenary general. There should be the answer you want in it. Take a look. Suhi didn't hesitate to take the letter, then opened it and read it. He finally knew what happened at Shiha in the North Slope. It was as he expected and guessed. Whether it was the 5,000 Tatar cavalry at Shiha or the 10,000 Tatar cavalry at the North Slope, they were all defeated. The defeat was very thorough. General Gulang, who was in charge of the North Slope, was killed in the chaos. Harak, who led the 5,000 Shiha cavalry, was lucky and was captured alive. Now he was in the hands of the mercenaries who originally wanted to kill him. But if Suhi was willing to surrender, this person would not die. This was the promise of the mercenary leader, the great Ming dynasty's loyalty and courage. It also expressed the other party's importance to him. At the end of the letter, there was also Yang Qindong's handwriting. General Suhi, I have long heard of your ability to command troops. I look forward to it. If you are willing to return, you will be put in an important position. The great Ming dynasty's loyalty and courage is a great promise. Just this line of words in Suhi's eyes was as heavy as 10,000 kilograms. It made Suhi feel touched. The fact that the other party was trying so hard to subdue him made him feel a little happy in his heart. A good bird chooses a good tree to nest in. Any capable person would want to find a wise master. Only in this way would they not bury their talents. Suhi also had a great dream in his heart. That was to rule the entire grassland like his predecessor, the greatest hero in his heart, Genghis Khan. Then he would let the Mongolian cavalry conquer the world and achieve supreme hegemony. Unfortunately, this dream was completely lost because he followed Agadorji. This was a greedy person, a short-sighted person. As long as he could eat his fill, wear warm clothes and have enough power, he would stop moving forward. If he followed such a person, he might be able to barely survive, but it was obviously impossible to achieve great things. If the other party did not promote him and put him in an important position, Suhi would have left long ago. He originally thought that he would not have the chance to fulfill his wish in this life, but now the opportunity was in front of him again. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the legendary war god who could easily defeat Yeshen, had extended an olive branch to him. How could he not be excited? But sometimes being excited was not enough. What really moved Suhi was that as long as he chose to surrender, he could save Hara Ruashen's life. This hit his heart, making him enter into a situation where he had no choice. Without Agadorji's attention and promotion, Suhi would not be where he was today. In order to repay the favor, he risked his life to let the other party leave. Logically speaking, he had already repaid the favor. But this didn't seem to be enough. He didn't just want to call it even, he also wanted the other party to owe him a favor. This way, no matter who talked about this matter in the future, they wouldn't blame him anymore. And if he could save Hara Ruashen, it would be equivalent to making Agadorji owe him a big favor. That would be perfect. Is Hara Ruashen still alive? I want to see him before making a decision. Although Suhi was already moved, he did not show it. Instead he said very calmly, "Yes, I will pass on the general's request to the mercenary general. You just have to wait for the news." Gushan naturally could not make any promises. He also did not have the authority to do so. All he could do was to pass on the original words. "Okay, I will give us 2 days. If we still do not see Hara Ruashen in 2 days, then you are deceiving me. At that time, even if I have to risk my life, I will fight you to the end." Suhi's voice became cold, releasing a murderous aura. Yes. Gushan was affected. After hurriedly agreeing, he left the tent. Not long after, this news was passed back to the mercenary camp. Regarding Suhi's request, the officers below had different opinions. Someone suggested that Hara Ruashen could not be handed over. This person had previously had unfavorable thoughts towards the 6th young master and even fought a big battle at the short stone pile. He was also Agadorji's only son. This person could not be let go and should be killed. Moreover, the other party was not surrounded. The news said that at least 6,000 Tatar cavalry had escaped. It was hard to guarantee that they would not become a threat in the future. As soon as this idea was put forward, it received a lot of support. Everyone thought that it was not worth it to let go of Hara Ruachu for the sake of Suhi, a loser. With so many people supporting this idea, the voices of quarreling in the tent quickly disappeared. After reaching a consensus, everyone's eyes fell on Yang Qindong, who had been sitting at the head of the tent without speaking. 8,000 soldiers are easy to obtain, but a general is difficult to find. You must have all heard of it. With a smile on his face, Yang Qindong's eyes swept across the faces of the officers in the tent. Suhi's ability is obvious to all of you. Let me ask everyone a question. In front of the mercenaries, if you were to command the Tatar cavalry, can you guarantee that you would do better than Suhi? Yang Qindong didn't go to talk about any great principles. Instead, he used facts to speak. Just a question was thrown out, and the tent immediately became silent. They asked themselves unless they knew all of the sixth young master's plans, and if they worked together they might have a chance of winning. Otherwise they would not be able to win this battle. It could be said that the moment the Tatar cavalry became enemies with the mercenaries, they had already lost. Haha, I know that many of you look down on the general of a defeated army. But what I want to say is that defeat is not the fault of the general. Whoever commands this army will have the same result. So why should you look down on Suhi? As for defeats, most of you have experienced them before, right? When have I ever looked at you in a different light? When this question was asked, many of the faces in the tent became red. This was especially true for Yella and Lu Dai, who were the commander of the Jurchen cavalry division. Their faces were flushed red. Weren't they the general of a defeated army? It was because of their ability that they were chosen by Yang Qindong and placed in an important position. Chapter 722. Even if he was such a person, what qualifications did he have to look down on others? Everyone stopped talking. Yang Qindong smiled and said, "As for Haraluo, a dead person has no value. If we can use a person who is already dead in our eyes in exchange for Suhi's sincere surrender, it is worth it. Don't you think so?" This time no one said anything. This was not only because Yang Qindong's prestige was too high, to the point that his words carried enormous weight. More importantly, what he said was indeed very reasonable, making it difficult for everyone to find a place to refute. Because Yang Qindong expressed his opinion, the matter was settled. He immediately let the scouts return to the first city and bring Haraluo to the battlefield. Yang Qindong also made the decision to go to the Tatar cavalry army to see Suhi personally. Naturally, some people showed concerns about this decision, but Yang Qindong said that he had confidence in the Black Knights. In addition, the mercenaries could press to the front line. Once they found that the situation was not right, they could immediately launch a general attack. Finally, the other officers could not say anything. The scout left quickly and returned quickly as well. After only a day and a half, Haraluo was brought in front of Yang Qindong. Compared to the last time they met, this person was slightly embarrassed. It should be because he had not washed his face for a few days. He gave people the feeling that he was very listless. "Come, fetch water for him to wash his face and get him a set of clean clothes to change into." Yang Qindong just casually glanced at Haraluo, then looked away. If such a small person was not still useful now, perhaps he would not take a second look at him in his life. Haraluo was taken away. When he followed Yang Qindong and the 100 or so black-clad knights out of the mercenary camp, it was as if he had changed into a different person. He was much more energetic. Although his appearance had recovered a lot, it could still be seen from his constantly moving eyes that he was still very afraid at this moment. After becoming a captive, he no longer knew what his future path was. He didn't even know when he would die. Under this shadow, he didn't dare to say anything. Once he noticed that the surrounding black-clad soldiers were looking at him, he tried his best to put on a flattering smile to curry favor. To Haraluo's horror, he was surprised to find that after leaving the mercenary camp, they were actually heading towards the Tatar army. He carefully looked at the black knights beside him. There were only a little more than 100 of them. He really couldn't understand. Would such a small number of people really dare to bring him to the Tatar cavalry's camp? Could this be the so-called boldness of the skilled? While thinking, Yang Qindong led more than 100 black knights through the ceasefire battlefield, heading straight for the Tatar camp. Along the way they saw many Tatar cavalry who were hesitating whether to surrender or not. When they saw Yang Qindong and the 100 black knights, their eyes were also filled with shock and confusion. In front of the largest tent in the Tatar cavalry's camp, Suhi stood to welcome them. When he saw the black knights coming from afar and Haraluo in the group, his face didn't change but his heart was really shocked. The mercenaries really did send Haraluo over. They really kept their word. "Everyone, since you are here, why don't you take a seat in the main tent? In the spirit of hospitality, and also wanting to test the other party, Suhi made an invitation. Of course he also wanted to test them. He wanted to see if the mercenaries were really so bold, and if they had the courage to do so. Of course. The one who answered him was Yang Qindong, riding the white dragon horse at the head of the group. Along the way he didn't panic as if he was walking in his own camp. He didn't show the slightest sign of weakness. On the contrary, when he came in front of Suhi, his eyes were still constantly looking at this person, as if he was looking at a treasure. Yang Qindong, who agreed, dismounted from his horse and led Beta Persei and Qiu Vi, as well as Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, who were escorting Hilario, and strode into the tent. As soon as they entered the tent, they could see that both sides of the tent were filled with executioners holding swords and sabers. There were about 50 of them. They were glaring angrily at Yang Qindong and the others who came in. It was as if they would chop the intruders into minced meat at the slightest command. "You are cheating, how dare you!" After Beta Persei and Qiu Vi saw the situation in front of them, they stood on the left and right respectively and pulled out their sabers. Their eyes were filled with anger and killing intent. On the other hand, Yang Qindong wasn't confused by the scene in front of him. Instead, he smiled and looked at Suhi, who had already walked to the front and was 3 meters away from him. He asked, "Is this how you treat your guests?" At this time, Yang Qindong not only showed that he wasn't afraid, but in fact he really wasn't. Hilario was still in his hands and hadn't been handed over to the other party yet. Just based on this, the other party didn't dare to act rashly. According to his analysis, the reason why they put on such a posture was just to scare him. While Yang Qindong was speaking, Badao Jiang and Peng Yu also tightened their grip on the sabers in their hands. The sabers were placed on Hilario's neck. It seemed that this movement would draw blood, causing Hilario to cry out in alarm. "Suhi, don't act rashly, don't act rashly." Instead of scaring the others, Suhi scared his own people. There was a trace of disappointment in his eyes. Then he waved his hand and the 50 axemen took a step back in unison, maintaining a safe distance from Yang Qindong and the others. After expressing a certain amount of goodwill, Suhi looked at Yang Qindong and asked, "Can you let them go now?" Logically speaking, the danger wasn't over yet. Letting them go now was equivalent to putting themselves in danger. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't agree so easily. However, Yang Qindong wasn't an ordinary person. 50 axemen wasn't a small number, but it wasn't a big deal in his eyes. The 4 men he brought with him could each fight against 10 men, and his own strength was unfathomable. Outside the tent, Dao Xiao was leading more than 100 black knights. It was impossible for them to fend off an army of 10,000, but it would not be a problem for them to fend them off for a while. Once chaos broke out here, the mercenaries outside would charge in. These were the reasons why he was so confident. Because of this, after hearing Suhi's question, Yang Qindong smiled. "Of course we can let them go. I originally wanted to give them to you. Come, let young Master Hilario go." Badao Jiang and Peng Yu were stunned for a moment. However, this was the 6th young master's order. Although the 2 of them were reluctant, they still put down their sabers and pushed Hilario to Suhi's side. This action also gave Suhi a fright. What he said just now was just to test the waters. If the other party didn't let him go, he would definitely mock them and point out that the mercenaries were also as timid as mice. He could use this opportunity to suppress the other party's momentum. But now the other party really let them go. Just this magnanimity and boldness made him speechless. Suhi didn't know what to say. Hilario, who was released, finally regained his freedom. He suddenly shouted, "General Su, quickly capture these people. Their status isn't low. We can threaten them to make the mercenaries pay the price." Along the way, although he didn't know Yang Qindong's true identity, he had met him twice. In addition, when he left the mercenaries' camp, he could see that many people looked at Yang Qindong with very respectful gazes. Just based on this, he guessed that this person's status wasn't ordinary. Thus he shouted loudly. At this moment, Hilario's style of being an ingrate was incisively and vividly displayed. These words also made the surrounding 50 executioners move. Just now the other party had hostages in their hands, so they didn't dare to act rashly. But now the enemy had nothing, so they didn't put him in their eyes. Hilario's shout also made Beta Persei, Qiu Vi, and the other 2 become very nervous. The 4 of them even involuntarily touched their waists. They all came with pistols. If the situation goes out of control, they will pull out their guns and kill. However, Yang Qindong still didn't panic. Instead, he looked at Suhi and smiled, as if to tell everyone that he was not an enemy but a friend. Suhi was also one of the calmer people. At least he didn't shout, nor did he have the intention to order the arrest. Instead, he looked at Yang Qindong, his eyes full of curiosity. But I don't know who you are? Seeing Yang Qindong's calmness and also seeing that this person was the leader of the Black Knights, Suhi was indeed interested. This person's boldness and courage were something he had never seen in his life. With this alone, this person was worthy of respect. What? General Su, you really don't know who I am? Well, I will tell you, listen carefully, I am the great Ming's loyal duke, the one you call the war god. With a smile still on his face, Yang Qindong revealed his identity word by word. Loyal duke? War god. The moment the name was said, not only Su He, but also the 50 executioners involuntarily took a step back, their faces showing a look of horror. What was the meaning of a person's name, the shadow of a tree, was perfectly interpreted at this time. After a brief panic, everyone carefully looked at Yang Qindong. After all, it wasn't the first time they heard the name of the war god, but it was rumored that this person had 3 heads and 6 arms and was 3 feet tall. But now, looking at him, he was the same as them but younger and more handsome. You are the war god? Suhi asked in disbelief. It's true. And when you go to the mercenary army in the future, you will naturally know that I am not lying. Yang Qindong said with a smile, almost patting his chest and taking out his ID card as proof. Chapter 723. It really was the war god. So he was truly excited. The true men of the grasslands all worshipped heroes. Without a doubt, the war god who could defeat the Walla's leader, Yes Hen, naturally belonged to the category of heroes. In the past they had only heard of his name. Now that they had finally seen him in person, how could they not be excited? Not to mention, the war god was now the commander of the mercenaries. He could even decide the life and death of many of them. Of course, what made Suhi even more excited was that this person actually came to her in person, and he just wanted to recruit her. At that moment he felt that he was extremely valued. That feeling was very good and made him feel very comfortable. Haraluo was also frightened by the war god's name. But soon, his eyes shone with excitement. This was the war god, someone who even Yes Hen was afraid of. If he could capture this person and give him to Yes Hen, he would definitely be able to exchange for a lot of good things. At that time, wouldn't he gain both fame and fortune? His faction would also have a great opportunity to develop. He would also be regarded as a hero by the grasslands warriors. Thinking about the various benefits he could obtain, Haraluo couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart. He shouted at the executioners in the tent, "What are you all standing there for? Hurry up and capture him. This is a great contribution." His voice was shouted out, and the crowd of executioners were also moved. But no one moved. Instead they all looked at Suhi. Suhi was the commander here. They could only listen to his orders. Seeing that no one moved and instead looked at Suhi, Haraluo was unhappy. He said with a dark face, "Did you not hear what I said? Let me tell you, if you don't listen, I will hand you over to my father. At that time, even Suhi won't be able to protect you." Poor Haraluo, he still didn't know that his father had already escaped with 3,000 cavalry. He thought that no one could stop him from doing anything with his father's name. Haraluo had exposed his true face. This made Suhi very unhappy. The war god was willing to take the risk alone. This was a display of courage and wisdom, but how could it not be that he trusted himself? Although he also wanted to defeat the battle god, that would bring him both fame and fortune. However, if he wanted to defeat them, he would have to defeat them fair and square on the battlefield. He would not have to resort to petty tricks and use the other party's trust to make a move. If he did that, he would not be a hero. In fact, he would be worse than a coward. That's enough. Suddenly, Suhi roared and stopped Haraluo's shouting. He then cupped his fists and said to Yang Qindong, "So it's the battle god. Sorry for the disrespect." Yang Qindong was very satisfied with Suhi's performance. The fact that the other party didn't make a move was enough to prove that he was a straightforward and upright man. Such a person was always worthy of others' trust. He smiled and said, "It's fine. I've admired General Su's talent for a long time. How about it? You gave me the conditions to send Haraluo back. Not only did I send him back, but I also appeared here personally. Does this count as showing enough sincerity?" He took the opportunity to state his purpose. These words caused Suhi's face to turn red. If he had only wanted to test the sincerity of the mercenaries before, the other party's performance was too good. It was so good that he had nothing to say. As a man, once a promise is made, even 4 horses cannot go back on it. Suhi was moved by Yang Qindong's sincerity. He immediately cupped his fists and said, "Battle God, I Suhi am very difficult to convince others, but I truly submit to you. From now on, Suhi is willing to serve by your side. Please accept me." As he spoke, he knelt on the ground. Suhi finally lowered his head. "Haha, good. Yang Qindong was naturally overjoyed. He laughed and took a few steps forward. He came in front of Suhi and reached out to help him up. Then the monarch and minister looked at each other and smiled. Everything was understood without words. Suhi expressed his intention to surrender. This scared Hilarion. Instead of his overbearing attitude, he stood obediently at the side like a cat. When he noticed Yang Qindong's gaze, he even tried his best to squeeze out a smile. He didn't even think about how he wanted to kill Yang Qindong just now. Yang Qindong did not even spare him a second glance. Such a person was not worthy of his attention. Yang Qindong did not even spare him a second glance. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted Suhi to join the mercenaries, this person would have died countless times. Yang Qindong could ignore Hilarion, but Suhi couldn't. With the intention of returning the favor, he first glanced at Haraluku, then at Yang Qindong and said, "War God, this subordinate has a presumptuous request, but I don't know if I can say it." "There's no harm in saying it," Yang Qindong said very generously. "This subordinate wants to send Hilarion away. If other Tatar cavalry are willing to follow, please don't stop them. As for the rest, this subordinate will try my best to persuade them to work for the mercenaries. Please allow it." This was equivalent to the last condition. It was also Suhi's end to some things. Since he had already done so many things, there was no harm in doing one more. Yang Qindong immediately nodded and said, "Okay, I promise you." "Thank you, War God." Suhi's attitude was already very respectful. After he finally made his choice, he relaxed a lot. In front of the big tent, more than 100 black-clad cavalry rode on horses. They wore black iron masks so people couldn't see their expressions at all. However, a solemn murderous aura leaked out uncontrollably. The Tatar cavalry who wanted to watch could only watch from afar. Time passed by minute. The 6th young master still hadn't come out. Fortunately, there were no sounds of fighting coming out of the big tent. But before there was a result, all the black-clad cavalry maintained their best state. They looked like they would pull out their swords and open fire once the order was given. In fact, they didn't just pull out their swords. Therefore, the black-clad cavalry carried a Type 95 on their back. Everyone's body was full of magazines. Even the quiver was full of grenades. This was just in case. Just when the tension was so high that a random sound could lead to a chaotic battle, the curtain of the big tent was finally lifted from the inside. Yang Qindong, wearing a red cloak, strode out. Beside Yang Qindong were Beta Persei Chiovi and the others. Compared to when he went in, there was one more person beside him, Suhi. It could be seen that the other party intentionally stood behind Yang Qindong, and he even showed a very respectful look. After walking out, Yang Qindong first nodded lightly to Dao Xiao and the other guards to show that he was fine. Then he turned to look at Suhi and said, "You may begin." "Yes." Suhi cupped his fists and answered. Then he strode away from Yang Qindong's side and walked to a place about 10 meters away from the big tent. Then he jumped onto a warhorse and shouted from above, "Everyone pay attention. Gather here. This general has an important matter to announce." At this time, the Tatar camp had experienced a few battles. After sending away all the wounded and a portion of people who had chosen to surrender, there were still about 7,000 people in the camp. With so many people gathered together, the momentum was still very great. Fortunately, they were worthy of being called an elite army. Even when they gathered, they were very orderly. No one panicked. Everyone stood in an orderly manner, either close or far away. However, their eyes were all on Suhi, waiting for the general's next order. After about the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the camp was once again safe. There were already very few people who continued to walk around. Suhi's shout finally rang out, and that resounding voice also reached the ears of every soldier. "I am Suhi. I have already made the decision to surrender and join the mercenary army. Brothers, if you believe in me, then please join me for a brand new beginning." The crowd was silent at first, but then there was a deafening shout. It was clear that this decision was very popular with the soldiers. Many people were already moved, but because there were still many people who had not made a choice, they could not force themselves to stand out. Thus they endured it. Now that even the general had decided to surrender to the mercenary army, they finally had nothing to worry about. The shouts came one after another, and it took a while for them to gradually calm down. Suhi's voice continued to ring out. Young Master Haruo has already been sent back. If anyone is willing to follow young master, I will not stop or oppose. You can leave with him. Those who do not wish to join the mercenary army can also leave with young master first. When you feel that it is safe or the time is ripe, you can leave on your own. From now on, everyone will go their separate ways. However, if one day we meet on the battlefield, we will definitely not be lenient. I hope that everyone can understand, and I also hope that those who leave will take care of themselves. He had given everyone another choice. He had spoken very gently at the beginning, but at the end, he had said such a sentence, which was full of threat. When these words entered the ears of the army, it indeed caused the faces of those who had ulterior motives to tighten. They had no choice but to think about it. If they really left, where would they go in the future? Moreover, the strength of the mercenary army was so strong. If they were to become enemies, would they be able to win? To put it simply, would they have a chance to survive? Yang Qindong heard Suhi's words and laughed in his heart. This person really did have some tricks up his sleeve. It was clearly a threat, but he used such a method to make it seem as if he was thinking for everyone. This was indeed a talent. At this point, Yang Qindong was no longer worried about the choice of the Tatar cavalry. With Suhi, this powerful general, he would definitely be satisfied with the result. In order to not create pressure for the other party and be able to do things freely, Yang Qindong left with more than 100 black-armored cavalry. Chapter 724. Not long after Yang Qindong left, Har also left the Tatar camp. Nearly 1,000 Tatar cavalrymen left with him. About 200 of them had received Lord Agar Dorj's kindness, and they were following the young master to repay his kindness. As for the rest, they did not want to join the Han army, or they were simply tired of war. Suhi kept his word and did not make things difficult for them. Instead, he allowed them to take their war horses and weapons and leave the camp. However, if one day these people could not continue and wanted to return, they would have to start all over again. A day later, Suhi brought about 6,000 Tatar cavalrymen and joined the mercenary army. At this point, the battle had come to an end. After several bloody battles, 8,000 of the 45,000 Tatar cavalrymen were killed and nearly 20,000 were wounded. Nearly 7,000 managed to escape, and in the end, more than 10,000 were captured or surrendered. On the other hand, the mercenary army had about 2,500 people who died or were seriously injured and could not return to the army. There were still more than 2,000 lightly wounded soldiers left behind. This was a great victory for them, no matter how one looked at it. Yang Qindong did not go back on his word and allowed his 4 regiments to replenish the soldiers from the captives and surrendered soldiers. After this was done, he selected some elite soldiers from the remaining Tatar cavalrymen to form a new Tatar cavalry regiment. The regiment commander was Suhi, and the number of soldiers was the same as the Nuzan cavalry regiment, 3,000. As for the remaining soldiers, they were incorporated into the newly expanded logistics regiment to replenish the soldiers. First city. News of the battle outside continued to pour into the city. The biggest change was that one could see captured Tatar cavalrymen and injured Tatar cavalrymen being sent into the city almost every day. Every time they appeared, the people in the city would talk about it. Although the citizens of the city weren't very sure about the number of mercenaries, they knew that there were about 10,000 to less than 20,000 mercenaries. Facing 45,000 elite Tatar cavalrymen with less than 20,000 people, many people were worried at the beginning. After all, the difference in strength was too great. Even if some people had seen the mercenaries' training methods, they still did not think that it would be easy for them to win. However, just as most people were not optimistic about their chances, reports of victory were sent into the city again and again. Under intentional propaganda, the more than 10,000 people in the city were clearly aware of the situation at the front lines, as well as how much the mercenaries had obtained in each battle. Seeing that they had won one battle after another, the people in the city were encouraged. They had more confidence in the mercenaries and were more determined to live in the city. Of course, there were two sides to everything. Some people were happy while others were unhappy. For example, some of the grassland youths in the city who wanted to join the mercenary army. They thought that if the front line was tight, they would have a chance to quickly rise and become a member of the mercenary army. However, news of victory kept coming in, especially when a large number of captives and wounded were sent into the city and passed through the streets in front of them. They couldn't help but start to worry. With so many captives, would the mercenaries choose to conscript? Would they still have a chance to join the army and create a better future? Amidst such worries, even better news came. Agar Dorj escaped, and the Tatar army was defeated. General Suhi finally chose to surrender and join the mercenary army. The beginning city was safe. It was safe. When this news spread to the city, many people went to the streets to celebrate. Only those ambitious young men who wanted to join the army were missing. They were afraid that they had no hope. After understanding the treatment of the mercenaries, the thing they yearned for the most was to join this army. At the same time, they could also earn a better tomorrow for themselves. After discussing, they gathered together and decided in private that when the god of war returned from the front line, they would jointly request to join the mercenary army and ask the god of war to give them an explanation and a chance. Because so many people gathered, such a matter could not be hidden from the members of the security bureau in the city. At first, they thought that something big was going to happen. However, after understanding the matter, they did not know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, they reported the matter to the director of the security bureau in the beginning city, who was also in charge of intelligence in the grassland, Feng Liang. Feng Liang was one of the old people in the security bureau. When it was first established, he was chosen by the director, Yang San, and transferred to his command. Facts also proved that Director Yang San's judgment of people was still very accurate. Feng Liang withstood strict training, and after becoming an official member, he performed well and completed several difficult jobs in succession. Finally, he became a marquis and the person in charge of the security bureau in the grassland. This time, the beginning city was newly built, so it naturally needed some elite soldiers to assist. Feng Liang came here again and was responsible for the intelligence and security work in the city. He had also spent a lot of time walking through the streets and alleys of the beginning city. He knew the situation and terrain of the city like the back of his hand. Under Feng Liang's efforts, the security bureau in the city was successfully established. Its members were scattered all over the city to ensure that no matter what happened, no one would be able to escape their eyes. This time, so many young and strong grassland men suddenly gathered together. How could they escape his eyes and ears? He hurriedly sent people to inquire about and understand the situation. In the end, he got such a result, which made him feel like he did not know what to say. Logically speaking, it was a good thing that the young man wanted to join the army. At least it proved that the army was popular. This was what many forces and armies wanted to see. However, the mercenary army paid attention to the elite route of a strong army. The sixth young master personally said that he did not ask for the number of mercenaries. He only needed them to have enough combat power. Only in this way would the treatment of soldiers be higher, and they would be more flexible and mobile in the war. As a result, the pressure on the logistical support would also be much less. The route of a strong army had proven its feasibility with facts. Since the establishment of the mercenary army, which time did they not win with fewer people? It was also because of the small number of troops that they were more flexible and mobile when they fought the war. Feng Liang, who understood this policy very well, could understand the feelings of these young and strong grassland men. He could also feel the benefits of the sixth young master's policy. For a moment he was caught in a dilemma. Since he knew what the request of these young and strong men was, there was no need to let them meet the sixth young master. This kind of small matter could be solved by him. How about this? Choose a few representatives from these young men who want to join the army. I will meet them alone. After some consideration, Feng Liang came up with a solution. That was to use the militia to solve the problem at hand. This way they would not need to take up the quota and resources of the mercenary army. It should be the best of both worlds. All they needed to do was to pay a certain amount of silver every month. In order to build an intelligence network, the thing that the security bureau did not lack the least was silver. This amount of silver was still something they could solve. Feng Liang made a decision. He even imitated the model of establishing the militia and reserve in Chichen City. This solution was indeed effective. After meeting the representatives in private, the two sides reached an agreement to allow these men to enter the ranks of the militia of the first city. As long as they had the opportunity to pass the assessment, they would be able to enter the regular frontline combat forces. Before that, what they needed to do was to be responsible for the security in the beginning city. Once they found any suspicious people, they could keep an eye on them. If necessary, they could inform the army in the city and cooperate with them to suppress the enemy. After doing this, not only could they get a reasonable name for law enforcement, but more importantly, they could also get some silver every month. It was tentatively set at 2 taels of silver every month. There would be an additional reward for meritorious service. 2 taels of silver was naturally nothing in front of the regular mercenary army. However, for ordinary people it was already an income. At this moment, both sides were very satisfied. A gathering of people that needed to trouble Yang Qindong was declared over before it happened. What was even more unexpected was that it did not take long for these grassland men, who were persuaded by Feng Liang to join the militia, to really make a great contribution. Yang Qindong, who had safely returned to the city, did not know about everything that Feng Liang had done in private. However, these things would be formed into a secret document and sent to him for review. However, no one knew whether he would value it or not. For example, Yang Qindong did not pay attention to the matter reported by Feng Liang. Instead, he focused on the eastern area of the beginning city. The scouts had sent back news that the 3 divisions of the Lung Feng division were already on their way to transport the goods from Chichen City that had just been received from Sea Town. They would be able to rush back to the beginning city in at most 2 days. The previous battle was just to establish his prestige and to stabilize his foothold. Now it seemed that everything was going smoothly. After this battle, not only did he show his prestige, but he also strengthened the army. This also gave Yang Qindong more confidence. Whether it was to defend the city or to fight, he also had more choices. However, if one wanted to conquer a place, war was only one of the methods. Another important method was economic occupation. As long as one controlled the economy of a place, it was equivalent to controlling its artery. Only then would one's influence be more far-reaching and one would be more powerful. Among the goods transported by the 3 divisions of the Lung Feng division, there were many goods that were hard currencies. This was also a good opportunity to strengthen the economic strength of the beginning city again. This was also something that Yang Qindong valued very much. Therefore, on the morning of the 3rd day, when the 3 divisions of the Lung Feng division escorted more than 500 carriages and appeared outside the city, he personally went up to greet them. While thanking them for their hard work, he also listened to the work reports from Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Qin Bo. Chapter 725. Ever since they left the first city and headed to the new Aragon city, they had openly raised the banner of the mercenary army. At the same time, they attracted the attention of the Baiming guards. Then, at the downstream of the Songhua River outside the Jianzhou left guard, they had a big battle with the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Baiming guards and won a great victory. They had made a great contribution in this battle, and because of this they gained the name of the mercenary army. The Baiming guards became more honest, and a logistics route that belonged to the mercenary army was opened up. On the way back from Sea Town to pick up the goods, there were no more Ming army soldiers to make things difficult for them. There were only some scouts following them from afar, inquiring about their situation. Good. Hearing that he had established his prestige with just one battle, Yang Qindong was naturally satisfied. The Ming army was mostly made up of Han people. This was his route. If he could avoid hurting them, it would be best not to hurt them. As long as the other party was honest, he did not mind creating a peaceful border for them. As for who wanted to attack the Han people, he would take care of it. Of course, if the Ming army was smart, things would naturally develop normally. If they wanted to make things difficult for the mercenaries, he would not introduce them to teach them a lesson. He would let them know who they could not afford to offend and who they could not have any ideas about. The 3 divisions of Lung Feng had returned. They escorted more than 500 carriages of various sizes and a large number of goods. Since these were things that Yang Qindong needed, Crimson City would naturally provide them with all their strength. There were food, drinks, clothes, and all kinds of things. Could be said that they had everything. Not only did they bring a lot of goods this time, it was enough to make the first city a commercial city on the grasslands. At the same time, there was also a talent who came with the army. His surname was Yu and his name was Mian. His father was the first city lord of Crimson City, Lord Yu Qian. Yu Mian had a reputation in history and his abilities were not ordinary. It was just that Yang Qindong did not appear, and in the end Yu Qian ended up being beheaded. As his son, it was natural that he would not have a good ending. Now things were different. Yu Qian was under the protection of Yang Qindong, and he had even handed over the management of such an important headquarters city to him. Naturally, his son would be able to do things much more smoothly. Yu Mian's arrival was not because his father, Yu Qian, wanted him to make his presence known. In fact, Yu Mian was already participating in the management of Crimson City. As the saying goes, one does not need to rely on one's own talents. Yu Qian was an upright gentleman. As long as he believed that something was right, he would not care about the opinions of others. Since his son was capable, why couldn't he be put in an important position? Yu Mian, who already had an official position in Crimson City and had begun to participate in the management, was summoned to Origin City after being recommended. This was Yang Qindong's order. Such a large city always needed someone to manage it, especially when it was just built. It could be said that there were a lot of things to do. If the person who came was not capable, wouldn't it be a waste of his energy? Finding a suitable city lord was a problem that Yang Qindong had been thinking about. He handed the matter of the candidates to Crimson City and asked them to report it. Among them was Yu Mian's name. In the end, he became the person that Yang Qindong wanted. When he saw Yu Mian, it was at the Yang residence in Origin City. The largest residence in this city was Yang Qindong's residence. In the pavilion in the back garden, Yang Qindong met Yu Mian, who was in his early 30s. The reason why he chose this place was to show his closeness. Only those who were chosen by Yang Qindong would be able to appear in such a private occasion. On the other hand, if it was someone unfamiliar, they could only meet in the living room. Yu Mian greets the sixth young master. After being brought to the back garden by Beta Persei, Yu Mian became excited when he saw the back of Yang Qindong, who was drinking tea alone from afar. He was still far away, but he had already bowed respectfully. "Haha, come have a seat." Yang Qindong laughed without even turning his head. Then he waved his hand and greeted Yu Mian casually. The more casual he was with you, the more he expressed his trust in you. Yu Mian naturally walked to Yang Qindong's side with a look of fear and trepidation. Then, he nervously and carefully sat on the empty chair opposite him. One shouldn't think that Yu Mian's performance was exaggerated. But for those who lived in Crimson City, there was no one who didn't know Yang Qindong and the sixth young master. For example, Yu Qian was the first to be kidnapped, so he naturally had a conflict in his heart. Coupled with his feelings for the great Ming Dynasty, it was basically impossible for him to work for other forces. Fortunately, Yang Qindong had never forced him. Otherwise, given Yu Qian's unyielding character, it would not be strange for him to commit suicide. He seemed to know what kind of person Yu Qian was, what kind of nature he had, and what kind of character he had. From the beginning, Yang Qindong did not intend to use force. He just let Yu Qian wander around the city. Then, under the influence of what he saw and heard, the environment really changed Yu Qian's mind. When he saw that Yang Qindong really wanted to change the people's lives, enrich the country and strengthen the people, and even create a dynasty that was more powerful than the great Ming Dynasty, his thoughts also changed little by little. During the day, he walked on the streets and observed his surroundings. He felt the vitality in Crimson City and the sincere and brilliant smiles on the faces of the people. At night, he tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. He thought about what kind of impact the development of Crimson City would have on the great Ming Dynasty and whether the development of such a city would be good or bad. Rather than saying that Yu Qian was loyal to the emperor of the great Ming Dynasty, it was better to say that he was loyal to the people of the great Ming Dynasty. By the same logic, he would help whoever could give the people a better life. After observing for many days, he confirmed that the development of Crimson City was for the good of the people. It could let them live a better life, obtain more respect and obtain more fairness. He was surprised to find that this was not the life he wanted, the life and world he wanted, the life he had been pursuing all this time. In the end, reality defeated him and changed Yu Qian. He finally decided to use his own ability to do something for the city. Then he was appointed to an important position and became the lord of a city. Facts also proved that he was indeed capable. Not only in military matters but also in the people's lives. After he was given great power, his performance would only improve. Facts further proved that Yang Qindong was right to put Yu Qian in an important position. Under his guidance, Crimson City entered an era of rapid development. With Yang Qindong's help in various aspects, it quickly became the largest city in the Yang Dynasty. It created countless wealth for the development of the entire Yang Dynasty and laid a solid foundation. Yu Qian was contributing to the development of Crimson City. Of course, his family was duty-bound as well. At this time, Yu Mian also became an official and became a capable subordinate under his father. He was a capable assistant. His performance was also remarkable. In the end, he came to the first city and became the person personally appointed by Yang Qindong. At this time, Yu Mian sighed with emotion about his experience. He could also feel the great responsibility on his shoulders. He had even begun to outline the future development plan of the first city in his heart. He was thinking that he must build the first city into the second Crimson City and continue its glory. Compared to Yu Mian's nervousness and excitement, Yang Qindong was very calm. He did not talk about business right away. Instead, he casually asked about the matters in Crimson City, especially if the higher-ups and officials could fulfill their duties. Yumian, don't be nervous. Just say whatever you want to say. You also know that I'm not in Crimson City all year round, so I don't know much about it. And where there are people, there will be fights. I know this better than you. If you say that your father is the city lord, no one will object to what he says and does, then I don't believe it. With a smile on his face, Yang Qindong directly sealed off the path of retreat as if saying, I can see that your father is an honest man, so I hope that you're also an honest man. If there's anything you want to say, then say it to me. Originally, he wanted to sing praises for Crimson City, but suddenly after Yang Qindong said this, Yumian knew that he could hold back those words in his stomach. But at the same time, he was very happy that the sixth young master was so considerate of him. Such a person was worthy of others' loyalty. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he thought for a while before saying, Sixth young master, just as you said, there will be fights where there are people. The higher-ups in Crimson City are indeed not a tight group. There are some people who have doubts about my father's decisions. But all in all, this is just a difference in opinion and a desire for power. At least up to now, no one has caused any major trouble. After all, with Sixth Young Master's reputation and the Security Bureau's people secretly watching, as well as the Special Inspector Bureau's Lord Shen Yu's guarantee on the surface, everything is still peaceful. Yumian was being careful and polite, and what he reported was all good news. However, Yang Qindong was not an ordinary person. He could still hear the hidden meaning in his words. Even if everything was peaceful now, it was unknown what would happen in the future. What's going on? Tell me the details. This time, Yang Qindong had already put away his smile, and his expression became much more serious. If he didn't do this, he was afraid that it wouldn't be enough to make Yumian tell the truth. It's fine. Yumian seemed to want to say something, but in the end he shut his mouth. And this had already angered Yang Qindong. Then, alright, you can rest for now. In a few days, there will be a carriage that will go to Sea Town to pick up supplies. You can go back to Crimson City with the carriage. After saying this, Yang Qindong slowly stood up. Since Yumian didn't want to tell him the truth, he would let him go back. There was no need for him to stay by his side if he couldn't confide in him, let alone hand over such an important city like the first city to him. Chapter 726. He actually asked him to go back. This was obviously a sign of anger. Yumian was frightened at this moment. When he came, many people's eyes were red with jealousy. His father had high hopes for him, hoping that he would be able to gain a foothold in the origin city and create a glory similar to the Crimson City. Even when he left, he patted his chest and almost made a military order. It could be said that his family had given him too much hope for his arrival. But now he was actually going to return empty-handed. One could imagine what would happen if he didn't do anything and went back with his tail between his legs. At that time, not to mention himself, even his father would be implicated. Then he would become the true sinner of the Yu family. The consequences would be unimaginable and unimaginable. Yumian waited for Yang Qindong to leave the pavilion. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly shouted, Sixth young master, please wait a moment. Stopping in his tracks, Yang Qindong turned around. What is it? Do you have something to tell me? Yes. This time Yumian lowered his head. Regardless of whether he was willing or not, he had no choice now. Then speak. Yang Qindong's expression was calm. Yes, sixth young master. With the continuous development of Crimson City, there are indeed some people who have become restless and dissatisfied. The most representative of them is Yang Taiju. This is not his real name. It is a name he changed after coming to Crimson City. His father thinks that this name is more resounding and is in line with our original intention of conquering the world with martial arts. And his father is Crimson City's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yang Shan. Since he had already spoken, there was no way out for Yumian. Thus, he revealed everything he knew about the situation. Yang Taiju is a very decisive person. He also has some tricks up his sleeves. Relying on the fact that he is Minister Yang's son, he bullies the good and oppresses the good. Many people who have money and power without any background have been oppressed by him. Not only that, but he also secretly kept the new products produced by the factories in Crimson City, using the excuse that they were not up to standard for his personal use, and then sold them to foreign merchants at a cheaper price. Sixth young master, as you know, the quality of our Red Nest City's goods is excellent, and the variety of them is wonderful. The demand has always exceeded the supply, and as long as these goods are out of the sea, they can be sold for a good price on land. Because of this, the entire Yang family has become rich. Yang Taiju used most of this money to establish connections. They used this money to bribe and rope in some officials of various levels in Crimson City, causing their network to grow larger and larger. I'm afraid that it won't be long before these people join forces. They will be able to restrict my father's orders. After saying these words, Yumian lowered his head. He knew that he had thrown a huge bomb today. Who knew how many people would be punished after this, and how many heads would fall to the ground because of this? Yang Qindong had been listening quietly, and there was no change in his expression. But in fact, his heart was already overflowing with anger. Everything Yang Taiju had done, in the words of future generations, was smuggling, and this was stealing from him. Then he used his money to bribe and collude with some officials. It could be imagined that in the long run, once the net was large enough and the energy was strong enough, the first one to be overthrown would be City Lord Yu Qian, who had faithfully carried out his orders. Perhaps it would be his turn next. To think that he was still fighting a bloody battle on the front lines, risking his life in order to seize more territory as quickly as possible, liberate more people, and accumulate more power and influence. But if the rear was unstable, wouldn't everything he was doing now be a wedding dress for others? If that was the case, he would instead become a puppet. Just the thought of it was laughable. Of course, Yang Qindong wouldn't believe Yumian's words. Who knew if Yumian, who appeared to be honest and considerate, spoke in such a way because he wanted to eliminate his dissidents? Besides, Crimson City was his base camp. There were too many of his trusted aides there. Would those people turn a blind eye to such a thing? With doubts in his heart, Yang Qindong returned to the pavilion and sat down. Tell me, Yang Taiju is so lawless. Does no one from the Security Bureau care about him? Could it be that the Special Inspector Bureau is useless? And those people from the military, will they turn a blind eye to it? It was precisely because he had left behind these forces and manpower that Yang Qindong was extremely at ease with Crimson City. He didn't believe that some people and some things could be bribed with money. Couldn't they tell that once he was angered, it would be useless no matter how much money they took out? Yumian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at Yang Qindong with a troubled expression. Say what you have to say. Don't hesitate. Beta Persei, call Tiger's mane over. Yang Qindong stared intently at Yumian's face as he roared outside. Beta Persei left in a hurry, at a loss. Yang Qindong looked at Yumian and said, All right, there are no outsiders here now. Tell me everything you know. Even if you say something wrong, I won't blame you. Furthermore, the matter of you saying something wrong won't spread. Now that things had come to this, Yumian had no way out. At that moment, he seemed to have made a decision as he said, Yes, sixth young master. This is the situation. This Yang Taiju is very capable. He first wooed one of Fifth Madam's personal maidservants, Lin Lin, and married her. This way he would have Fifth Madam's support. Then he joined forces with the director of Crimson City's Security Bureau, Chen Shuquan. The sixth young master definitely knows this person. This person doesn't speak much, but as his name suggests, he likes power very much. Can be said that he hit it off with Yang Taiju. With the support of the Security Bureau, he naturally gets twice the result with half the effort. As for the Special Inspector Bureau, he definitely won't find trouble with Fifth Madam. My father once doubted it, but soon, Lin Lin personally appeared in the City Lord's office. After that, I heard from my father that Lin Lin said that the entire Crimson City belongs to the Yang family. The Yang family's madam only took some money from her family. Is there a need to inform outsiders and use outsiders to criticize her? There's no need to talk about the military. Now that there's a political department, Lung Song and Commander Gao Xiong are thinking of how to compete with them. How could he possibly intervene in the local affairs? Wouldn't that be handing over his weakness to others? Therefore they simply turn a blind eye. As for the other officials, they don't dare to interfere. With the idea that mortals suffer when immortals fight, they hide as much as they can. As long as these people don't provoke them, they will also turn a blind eye. Upon hearing Yumian's explanation, Yang Qindong widened his eyes. No one dares to interfere. Didn't the Wan family do anything? Wan Xiaoyu is my future sixth madam. Didn't she stand up? It could be heard that although this was a questioning voice, there was a hint of trembling in his voice. It was unknown if it was because of anger or disappointment. Sixth madam? Ever since you left Crimson City, Sixth Madam led the publicity team to perform for the nearly 5 million Han people. She said that she wanted to change the views and mentality of these people as soon as possible, so she hasn't been in Crimson City. And these things have only happened in the past few months. Sixth Madam doesn't know about it. Yumian knew that this was very likely related to a girl's future happiness and the future of a large family. Of course he had to explain it clearly. Upon hearing this, Yang Qindong's expression looked better. But soon he sneered. The Yang family's money is indeed used by the family. There's no need for outsiders to interfere, but the problem is that she's just a maidservant. What right does she have to represent Fifth Madam? For this matter, did Fifth Madam really show up? This? Yumian thought for a while and shook his head. Probably not. At least, Fifth Madam didn't say anything to my father. Then this Lin Lin acted on her own accord. But Fifth Madam didn't use people to investigate. She is also responsible. Yang Qindong said. This was equivalent to settling the matter. He really didn't expect that such a thing would happen in Crimson City. If not for the fact that he happened to talk to Yumian today and discovered some clues, he was afraid that this matter would only get bigger and bigger and one day, it would become an unsolvable problem. It seems that some people are used to living a peaceful life. They have forgotten what it's like to lick blood on the blade. If that's the case, then don't blame me for being heartless. After speaking, Yang Qindong raised his hand and slammed down on the stone table in the pavilion. Boom! A thunderous sound suddenly rose. After Yang Qindong's anger soared to the sky and he used his qi, the stone table actually cracked and fell to the ground with a loud bang. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who had just entered the courtyard, saw this scene clearly. Young master. Both of them cried out in surprise and then ran over in big strides. After all, Yang Qindong was still made of flesh and blood. When he slammed down, his hand was bleeding. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei cried out in pain and shock. They hurriedly shouted outside and arranged for the military doctor to bandage the wound. At the same time, both of them looked at Yumian angrily. Don't blame Yumian. It has nothing to do with him. Since you're here, listen to what Yumian has to say. Tell me your thoughts later. Yang Qindong's voice was very calm. He then waved his hand and went to find the military doctor, including his wound. Yang Qindong didn't doubt Yumian's words because some things could be found out after an investigation. If he was lying, then even his father Yu Qian couldn't protect him for framing Fifth Madam. After leaving the courtyard and finding the military doctor, Yang Qindong returned to the backyard after bandaging his hand. He saw Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei standing there with flushed faces. Beside them was Yumian, who was trembling with fear. He lowered his head and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Chapter 727. Are you trying to scare Yumian? Let me tell you, this has nothing to do with him. He is the hero. Needless to say, Yang Qindong knew that the two of them must have gotten angry in front of Yumian. Otherwise they wouldn't be like this. This subordinate doesn't dare. Yumian did see Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei getting angry just now. It was as if they wanted to eat someone, which really gave him a fright. Alright Yumian, you don't have to be afraid. You have contributed to this matter. How about this? You go take a walk on the streets first and familiarize yourself with the situation in the beginning city. Then, write a city management report for me to read. We'll talk about the construction of the beginning city when the time comes. You can go now. With a smile on his face, Yang Qindong said to Yumian with a pleasant expression. Yumian naturally nodded and agreed. He excused himself and resigned. After there was no one else around, Yang Qindong's expression turned cold again. Tell me, what do the two of you think? Kill all these sinners. Yes, not only do we have to kill them all, but we also have to hold a public trial to clarify their crimes. We have to let all the officials in the Crimson City know what the consequences of doing wrong are. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei expressed their opinions one after another. After listening to Yumian explain everything from the beginning to the end, they were really angry. They didn't expect that while they were fighting for their lives in front of them, the people behind them would be like this. They even felt that their efforts were not worth it. Yes, some people have to be killed. The public trial also has to be held, but the evidence still has to be found first. Crimson City can't be in chaos because of this. It has to develop normally and healthily. Yang Qindong also said as if he had made a decision. Although Yangxia was developing rapidly now, in fact, everything was based on Crimson City. For example, the two provinces of Vietnam and Laos, the development of the beginning city, the expansion of the army, and the improvement of combat power all required a lot of money as a foundation. With money it was naturally easier to do things. Without money, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was difficult to do anything. For the development of Crimson City, Yang Qindong put in a lot of effort. Not only did he share the fruits of his labor, but he also increased the salaries of the officials to ensure that they could work without any worries. But now it seemed, the human heart could never be satisfied. He originally thought that everyone would be fine, but since there were still problems, he had no choice but to change his strategy. And this was the result of these people asking for it. It seems that I have to rectify my work style. Check it out and immediately send a message to Yang San. Directly ask him what he does as the chief of security and whether he still wants to work. If he doesn't want to work anymore, arrange for him to go to Crimson City to farm. Don't say that I didn't take care of him. Give him 50 mu of land, which is enough for his family to retire now and in the future. Then send a message to Yang Wu, scold him and ask him to cooperate with Yang San's next work. Send a message to the first madam, ask her to lecture the fifth madam, tell her that when I'm not around, she has to take care of the maids under her. Send a message to Xinyu, scold him as a person in his position he has to do his job. If he can't do it then he should just resign. Send a message to Luan Xiaoyu with her as the leader, let them carry out a rectification operation including the military. Yang Qindong issued a series of orders. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's expressions also became extremely solemn. They knew that this time the sixth young master was really angry. He was so angry that he wanted to reshuffle the cards in Crimson City. The orders were issued one by one. The two of them were afraid of forgetting something, so they had already taken out a pen and paper and began to write it down. Not long after, the two of them turned around and went straight to the telegraph room. It could be imagined that there would be a lot of work to be done. After arranging everything, Yang Qindong became relaxed. He walked towards the military supplies that were delivered. This time there were a lot of commercial goods. He wanted to carry out commercial activities in the first city, so he also wanted to build a commercial street here. Reality told him that he couldn't put all his eggs in one basket. He still had to make multiple preparations. It would be best if the city below could be self-sufficient. In this way, even if there was a problem in one of the links, it would not affect the overall situation. In the following time, Yang Qindong found Yu Mian. The two of them began to walk through the streets and alleys to plan the future construction of the first city. At this time, several fast boats were heading towards Crimson City from the sea. In the cabin, Yang San, who had a fierce face, was among them. Ever since he received the telegram, he rushed to the nearby dock from the Great Ming Dynasty. Along the way he had a gloomy face. The fast boat that belonged to the security bureau had already been arranged. After he boarded the boat, he went straight to Crimson City. The telegram was in Yang San's hands. He had already read it countless times. However, every time he read it, his heart would ache. Especially when he saw that he was given 50 mu of land to retire in, he felt a burst of shame. With his indestructible brotherly relationship with Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, he sent several telegrams back and finally figured out what had happened. He also finally knew why the sixth young master was so angry. Qin Shuquan, you've caused me a lot of trouble. Next, you'll never be able to make a comeback. Sitting in the cabin, Yang San said fiercely in his heart. The work of the security bureau had always been very effective. Because of this, he had received countless praises from the sixth young master. After a long time he was a little numb. He even had the idea that the work of the security bureau was very easy to do. No matter who was arranged to take up the post, there shouldn't be any problems. Yang San was careless, or rather he was blinded by victory. He really didn't think about it. The security bureau's achievements today were naturally inseparable from their efforts. However, the more important reason was that Yang Qindong had invested a lot of money in this. The money that the Security Bureau spent in a year alone was more than the annual national taxes of Baiming or Southern Ming. This was still referring to the current situation. The territory wasn't that big and there weren't many areas that needed to be controlled. As it continued to develop, this money would only be spent more and more. It was precisely with this money as a guarantee that the Security Bureau could get more information and information. It was hateful that Yang San hadn't paid attention to this before, so when he used people again, he didn't pay so much attention to the inspection. For example, Qin Shuquan was also one of the old people when the Security Bureau was first established. His actual ability was very ordinary. It was precisely because he had to be taken care of that he was arranged to be a director in Crimson City. After all, the situation there was the best. As long as he didn't take the initiative to look for trouble, not only was the work easy, it was also easy to achieve results. Yes, the results were out now. Even the sixth young master was alarmed, and he was even scolded because of it. Just based on this, he couldn't tolerate it. Yang San would definitely not show mercy to this kind of person who spoiled the pot of soup with a piece of radish *T. After such a big incident, Yang San was almost sent home to be a farmer. If this matter couldn't be resolved, he was afraid that this time he really wouldn't be able to report back. Has the Security Bureau's operation team set off? Yang San thought about some of the things that he needed to do when he arrived at Crimson City and thought that he needed reliable people. He looked at Che Chao and asked. Che Chao was a supervisor under the Security Bureau. He was very capable, but because he was still too young and wasn't in the first batch to enter the Security Bureau, he didn't have enough qualifications. Therefore, he had been staying by Yang San's side to gain experience. This time he brought Che Chao over to solve Qin Shuchuan's problem better and faster. At the same time, he also wanted to take the opportunity to see if this person had the ability to succeed Yang Shuchuan's position, and if there were any problems with his character. After Qin Shuchuan's incident, Yang San started to pay attention to the character of his subordinates. Reality had already proven that if a person was unreliable, the stronger their ability, the more likely they would become a black sheep. Yang San would definitely not make the same mistake twice. Chief, the operation team has transferred 200 people over. They are all safe and reliable and they don't have any contact with each other. This time, they were ordered to rush to Crimson City from various places and won't leak any information. It's just that when they enter Crimson City's pier, it might be a little troublesome. The person who spoke was Che Chao. He had delicate features and looked very young. Don't worry, when the time comes, you will stay at the pier and be in charge of receiving them. I will give you my token. Yang San said without the slightest emotion in his eyes. This was also the appearance he often maintained in front of his subordinates. Perhaps only in this way people couldn't see his true thoughts. With Yang San's token, entering the strictly guarded Crimson City's pier would naturally be incomparably smooth. Che Chao quickly agreed and then shut his mouth. Until now he still didn't know why he suddenly returned to Crimson City, but his intuition told him that there must be some secret mission because if there was a shortage of manpower, there was a Security Bureau branch in Crimson City, and there were quite a number of people there. However, not informing them seemed to indicate a lot of problems. After Yang San asked these questions, he fell back into a state of meditation. He was already planning his every move after entering Crimson City. This time he didn't want to rely on others. He wanted to personally investigate Qin Shuchuan's problem. If everything was like what the sixth young master said in the telegram, he would solve it according to the family law and cut off this malignant tumor of the Security Bureau with his own hands. Crimson City. It was still incomparably bustling. Even when the sky was dark, the main streets were already brightly lit. In the Great Ming Dynasty, kerosene lamps were still used, and the palace ministers only used candles. Just this point alone was many times better than before. As the citizens of Crimson City, they were also the first to enjoy the benefits of modern electrical industry. Meanwhile, in a courtyard that was known as the Street of Light, some people were doing shady things. Chapter 728. In a secret room there were only 2 people sitting inside. There was tea and some snacks on the table. Brother Qin, this time Yu Mian went over there. Who knows what he might say? I have to say that you're still too careful. If you did as I said, you should just kill him. Wouldn't that solve the problem once and for all? A slender, handsome man with extremely thin lips took the lead to speak up. This person was Yang Taiju. With a father like Yang Shan and a good appearance, he was blessed by the heavens. It could be said that the heavens treated him well. As long as he behaved himself, he was destined to have a good life. Unfortunately, his ambition was too big, so big that it was beyond his ability. It was only a matter of time before he was destroyed. Sitting opposite Yang Taiju was an ordinary-looking man. Even if such a person walked on the street, he wouldn't attract anyone's attention because he looked too ordinary. His height was ordinary, his facial features were ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. Such a person was suitable for an organization like the Security Bureau. No matter what, he didn't stand out. He was Qin Shuquan, the director of the Security Bureau in Crimson City. No. Qin Shuquan spoke, Yu Mian absolutely can't be killed. Not to mention that his father is Yu Qian. If something happens to him, it's impossible that no one will come to investigate. When the higher-ups call for this person, if we do this, wouldn't that be exposing ourselves? Yang Taizhu also knew that killing Yu Mian at this time was a little too far-fetched, but for some reason he had a faint worry in his heart. Ordinary people didn't dare to casually talk about him, but this person had a father who was more powerful than him. Once he saw that person, he really couldn't predict what he would say. "Sai, it's too late to say anything now. I hope he'll be honest and not talk nonsense." Although Yang Taizhu was saying words of comfort, his face was still nervous. Qin Shuchuan's ordinary face chuckled and said, "Brother Yang, you don't have to be too worried. Yu Mian isn't that stupid. Saying anything about us won't do him any good. Besides, he has no evidence of our crimes in his hands. Besides, although he has gone to the north, it is still unknown whether he will be able to see that person, or whether he will have the opportunity to meet him alone. Even if he dares to say anything, our security bureau will be the first to receive the news. At least until now, I haven't received any orders. You don't have to worry." "Yes. With Brother Qin here, I am naturally not worried." Yang Taizhu chuckled. Then, as if he had thought of something, he asked, "By the way, Brother Qin, do you think the Security Bureau will secretly arrange for other people to come to Crimson City?" "I don't think so," Qin Shuquan said confidently. "The director has a good relationship with me. He won't suspect me easily." If he really has any thoughts, he should ask me first. Even if he sends someone to investigate, he should inform me. Even if you don't inform me, my men are watching the docks day and night. It will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for anyone who wants to get to the docks without being noticed. Qin Shuquan was indeed very confident. He was equally confident in his relationship with Yang San. Logically speaking, he was right. If it was just an ordinary person who complained, Yang San would really inform him beforehand. After all, suspecting a subordinate for no reason would only make the other brothers bitterly disappointed. But he forgot one thing. It depended on who was the one who complained. What if it was Yang Qindong who gave the order? Then it wouldn't be a complaint, but 100% execution of the order. If Yang Qindong gave the order, Yang San would definitely attract great attention. Not only that, but he would also have to do a good job. Even if there was no problem, he must provide evidence. Under such circumstances, how could Yang San inform Qin Shuquan about it? At this moment, it could only be said that Qin Shuquan was too confident, so confident that he was a little arrogant. It was a pity that no matter if it was Qin Shuquan or Yang Taizhu, they didn't think too much about it. They only thought that even though Yang Qindong was formidable, to the extent of having an incomparable status in the entire Yang faction, in all of Crimson City, a person was a person, he wasn't a god, how could he possibly care about everything? Furthermore, they didn't do anything to betray Yang Xia. They were just using their power and status to earn more money. Was there anything wrong with that? Which dynasty, which family didn't use this opportunity to develop? What they did wasn't a big deal, so it wouldn't attract Yang Qindong's attention. Yu Mian's matter seemed to have come to an end here. Following that, the two of them talked about the Luan family. The Luan family was a special existence in the entire Crimson City. The Yang family only had a total of 4 people, but these 4 people all held high positions and held different positions and influence in different industries. Especially their daughter Luan Xiaoyu. When she reached the age, she would become the 6th madam. How could such a family not be illustrious? In Crimson City, anyone with ambition would have the idea of getting close to the other party. Because once they obtained the friendship of the other party, no matter what they did in the future, it would be twice the result with half the effort. Yang Taizhu had been thinking about this recently. Considering the current situation of the Luan family, he was powerless against Luan Qi and Luan Qi's mother, Zhou Hua. These two had power and status and were busy with work every day. Outsiders simply didn't have the time to come into contact with them. As for his daughter Luan Xiaoyu, her identity meant that no one would dare to have any ideas about her. Even Yang Taizhu couldn't, and even his father Yang Shan didn't dare to touch her. After thinking about it, there was only one Luan Xiaoqin. This person was placed in an important position and had already become the governor of Lao province at a young age. His future was limitless. Most importantly, he had a fatal flaw, and that was that he was young and he still didn't have a wife. Although Luan Xiaoqin had already married 2 concubines in order to appease the hearts of the nobles in Lao Lao, and also in order to give birth to the Luan family, he didn't have a wife. In the eyes of others, that was the high and mighty position, and only then was he recognized by the outside world as a member of the Luan family. Currently, Yang Taizhu and Qin Shuquan were discussing the matter of finding a wife for Luan Xiaoyu. They had already thought about it. As long as this wife was one of their own, then if anything critical happened in the future, this person would play an absolutely crucial role. This was equivalent to not only establishing a relationship with the fifth madam, but also joining forces with the sixth madam's family. At that time, as long as the two pillow winds blew, and the one above loosened her mouth, even if there was a huge matter, it could be suppressed. We have to hurry up with the matter of finding someone. He's not young anymore, and finding a wife is only a matter of time. If it wasn't for that statement that the wife of a high-ranking official must be a Han, I'm afraid that there would already be arrangements and we wouldn't have a chance. Yang Taiju thought about this matter and reminded Che Chao, who was sitting opposite him. Brother Yang, don't worry, I have already arranged for the security bureau to search the city. It's just that your requirements are a bit too high. You need to be young and beautiful, and you also need to have a clean background. The most important thing is that you listen to us. This kind of search is somewhat contradictory, so it dragged on for a few days. While Che Chao was complaining, Yang Tieju's eyes were already wide open. The person must be beautiful, otherwise Luan Xiaochen might not be able to take a fancy to her. Her background must also be clean. Do you think that when the Luan family is looking for a wife, they won't let people investigate? As for listening to us, this is even more important. We won't be kind enough to make a wedding dress for others. The person we find must be helpful to us. Yang Taiju didn't relent, and Qin Shuquan could only sigh and nod. Okay, I'll continue to arrange for people to search. By the way, the latest batch of goods should be out of the cabin. When will you give me a definite letter? I'll start to arrange it. Well, it'll be soon. It'll be in 3 days at the new dock. I've already arranged everything that needs to be arranged. When the time comes, all you need to do is to send people from the security bureau to temporarily seal off the dock for 4 hours. Then everything will be ready. Qin Shuquan nodded when he heard this. That's easy, it's not the first time we've done such a thing. Ah. The two looked at each other at this moment and smiled. The so-called status and power were all transient, only the gold and silver in their hands were real. As long as they had money, where couldn't they be happy and carefree? The two were still secretly plotting here, and from time to time, their laughter could be heard, which was a kind of imagination for the future. But what they didn't know was that while they were talking, the director of the security bureau, Yang San, had already arrived at the new dock on a fast boat without anyone noticing. He was stopped by the security bureau of the Crimson City, who were guarding here day and night. After Yang San led Che Chao and dozens of people off the fast boat, he took out the pass issued by the security bureau, and Lung Feng, who was guarding the dock, allowed them to pass according to the regulations. But soon, secret agents of the security bureau surrounded them. Wait, you said that you have a pass from the security bureau, but why haven't we heard about this? Take it out and let us have a look. 4 men dressed like commoners walked over. Then they looked at Yang San's group of dozens of people with arrogant looks on their faces. Who do you think you are? Che Chao stepped forward. For a small fry like this, there was no need for the director to come out personally. The people of the security bureau were used to doing whatever they wanted. Suddenly they saw someone who was more arrogant than them. The 4 of them looked at each other, then laughed. Yo, I didn't know that you're so brave. Do you know who we are? Let me tell you, have you heard of the security bureau? You actually want to enter the city under our banner? Then you have to go through us first. Chapter 729. The leader had a smug look on his face. In fact, he was also one of Director Yang Shuchuan's most valued subordinates, Dong Hui. Usually he was in charge of the entry and exit of the docks. When he said this, he intentionally glanced at Lung Feng, who was on duty. He was basically telling Che Chao and the others that if they didn't want to be captured by Lung Feng, they had to be more obedient. Usually he would scare others, but this time he was intimidated by Dong Hui's words. Che Chao smiled but didn't reply. He only turned his head to look at Director Yang San, obviously asking for instructions. Don't make a big deal out of it. Take them down first. Yang San's position meant that he was incomparably decisive when it came to doing things. He really wasn't in the mood to explain anything to a few small fries. As soon as Yang San spoke, the people around him immediately moved. They moved like lightning and restrained 3 of them. Only Dong Hui's skills were not bad. He actually dodged them. After jumping 3 meters away, he suddenly shouted at Lung Feng, who was on duty, "Come quickly, there's a spy here." As soon as he shouted, the Lung Feng over there moved. As elites, they had long been paying attention to what was happening here. The appearance of Yang San's group was already very eye-catching. It was difficult for dozens of men not to attract attention wherever they went. However, they had the security bureau's credentials. They belonged to two different departments, so they had no choice but to let them go. When they saw Dong Hui, who was also from the security bureau, stop them, they thought that it was indeed an internal matter of the security bureau, so they didn't care. However, Dong Hui's sudden shout made them feel that something was wrong, so they swarmed over. The entire squad of Lung Feng only had a few seconds to pull out their guns, then surrounded Yang San and the others. "Put your hands on your heads and squat down. Tell us your true identities or we'll shoot." The black muzzles were fixed on Yang San and the others. Che Chao first stood in front of Yang San, using his body as a human shield, then said, "We're all on the same side, don't misunderstand." "Who's on the same side as you? You keep saying that you're from the security bureau, but why didn't we receive any orders? You want to play the role of a spy from the security bureau? Your performance is still lacking." Dong Hui jumped out, accusing Che Chao and the others of having a problem with their identities. Che Chao's identity was known to many of the Lung Feng patrolling the area, who often appeared at the docks. Now that he said this, of course, everyone believed him and not Yang San and the others. Che Chao's group, Dong Hui's accusation, everyone had their own opinions. If this continued, the situation would only get worse. Seeing that the situation was about to get out of control, Yang San finally stood up and said, "All of you shut up." As Yang San spoke, he took out an officer's certificate and handed it to a Class 1 sergeant, Lung Feng. "This is my certificate. It's enough to prove my identity. If you still don't believe me, send someone to the palace with this and find Yang Wu. You will verify everything." Lung of Lung Feng's Lung, the Lung's SSS, it's. Seeing that it was a green military ID, squad leader Lung Feng took it without any hesitation. He opened it and saw the words Yang San, Director of the Security Bureau, Senior Colonel written on it. The rank of colonel was also the highest in the mercenary army at that time. Other than Yang Qindong, the 1st Division Commander of the Army, Lung Song, and the 1st Division Commander of the Navy, Gao Xiong, were only at the same rank. However, a senior colonel had appeared in front of him. Lung Feng's expression changed as he looked at Yang San. Speaking of which, if Yang San's military certificate showed that he was a major, or even a lieutenant colonel, it wouldn't have aroused Lung Feng's suspicions. However, the senior colonel was too eye-catching. It gave people a surreal feeling. If that's the case, I'll need to send someone to the palace with this document. I hope you can understand. Class Monitor Lung Feng didn't dare to make a decision at the moment, so he decided to do as the other party said. After all, he knew Yang Wu. Yang Wu would come to the docks to check on things when he had nothing to do. "Sure, but I have a request. No one here is allowed to leave. Also, what happened here must not be spread out before Yang Wu arrives." Yang San nodded. He could understand the other party's actions. They were also doing things according to the rules, but he wouldn't allow others to ruin his big plan. "All right." Class Monitor Lung Feng was also very straightforward. After making a promise to Yang San, he sent the vice squad leader out and told him to ride a bicycle to the palace to see Yang Wu Yi. Lung Feng didn't speak to him. Instead, after looking at the document, his attitude changed greatly. In Dong Hui's eyes, all of this gave him a bad feeling. The other party claimed to be from the Security Bureau, but he had never seen them before. Moreover, judging from Lung Feng's attitude towards them, they seemed to be of a very high rank. Could it be that the other party was his superior? When he thought about how the Security Bureau mostly communicated through a single line, such a possibility existed, his expression became somewhat ugly. The mission that Director Qin Shuquan had given him was to watch here and not allow strangers to come ashore. If there were any, he had to report it. For the sake of his duty, he prepared to leave quietly. But just as he took a step forward, Yang San's voice rang out, "You are very smart and know how to see the situation. It's just that you followed the wrong person. If you can turn over a new leaf, you can be considered a promising talent." He didn't think that his actions would be seen by others. At this moment, Dong Hui knew that he couldn't leave, so he could only turn his head and chuckle. Then he stood there and waited. He was following orders, and what he did was in accordance with the rules. There was really no need to be afraid of others. Both parties waited here. In less than an hour, the sound of bicycle bells rang out in the distance. Following that, Yang Wu led a group of Lung Feng and appeared here. Even though it was night and the lights at the pier weren't very bright, Yang San still recognized at a glance that this time, it wasn't only Yang Wu who came. The division commander of the army's 1st Division, Lung Song, also appeared with him. Yang Wu was naturally dressed casually, while Lung Song was indeed wearing a senior colonel's military uniform. The 2 bars and 4 fours were extremely dazzling under the light. Seeing that the division commander had arrived, the platoon commander at the pier immediately stood at attention and saluted. Lung Song stopped the bicycle and casually bowed to the soldiers of the Lung Feng. He strode over to Yang San with a smile on his face and said, "Chief Yang, why didn't you say anything before coming? This is a surprise attack, isn't it?" Seeing that not only did the division commander know Yang San, but his attitude was also so warm, the platoon commander at the side naturally retreated to the side. At this moment, Dong Hui's expression also turned ugly. It was obvious that he had made a mistake this time. It seemed that not only was the other party one of his men, but his position was also quite high. Yang San returned the military salute to Lung Song, but there was no smile on his face. After the salute, he said to Che Chao, "Restrain these 4 people, I want to interrogate them later." After making some simple arrangements, Yang San looked at Lung Song and glanced at Yang Wu. He only said one sentence, "Young master is very angry this time." With just one sentence, Yang Wu, who was incomparably famous in Crimson Nest City, who was called Yang Wu Yi, immediately lowered his head. Just one sentence was enough to show that the young master was dissatisfied with him. As one of the first 5 servants of the Yang family, they were different from the others. Others might have to rely on military merits to be promoted, but their status rose along with Yang Xie's continuous growth. If one had to describe it, they were the same as the eunuchs by the emperor's side. They only needed to serve Yang Qindong well. It could be said that a single sentence determined their future in life. Now that the master was angry, it meant that Yang Wu didn't do his job well. Yang Wu felt very ashamed. Seeing Yang Wu lower his head, Yang San didn't say anything else. Instead, he looked at Lung Song and said, "Young master is also very dissatisfied with your work. Crimson City is Yang Xie's foundation, yet such a big thing happened. You didn't notice it, didn't report it, and didn't solve it. This time you lost points. Yes, I will reflect." Lung Song also lowered his head, looking like he had done something wrong and was very regretful. Logically speaking, with his position in the military, Lung Song was the 1st Regiment commander of the army, the 1st Division commander of the army. Other than Yang Qindong, very few people could suppress him, not even Yang San. However, the problem was that Yang San came as an imperial envoy to solve the problem. His position was completely different. He came as a representative of the 6th Young Master. What he said was also instructed by the 6th Young Master. Other than admitting his mistake, he could only cooperate. There is no use in reflecting. The Young Master wants to see results. I hope that you can redeem yourselves and cooperate with my work. If you can't even do this well, I can only report the truth to the Young Master. When the time comes, if your positions change, don't blame me. Yang San didn't want to have any deep contact with Lung Song. Although the other party was also in a high position, he was very clear about his own identity. He was a servant of the Yang family, one of the Young Master's people. He only served the Young Master and didn't need to care about other people's feelings. Moreover, as the head of the Security Bureau, if he had too much contact with important members of the military in the eyes of others, it was inevitable that they would have other thoughts. If that was the case, he couldn't imagine what the result would be. Yang San's official words fell into Lung Song's ears. He didn't even dare to have any thoughts of objecting. Yes, Lung Feng of the army will definitely cooperate. We will definitely cooperate. Very good. That was to lock up Lung Feng in this class first. It's not that they did anything wrong, but this is an important matter. We can't be careless in the slightest. My arrival is still a secret and definitely can't be spread. Understand? Yang San was satisfied with Lung Song's attitude. He took this opportunity to give his first order after coming ashore. Chapter 730. Understood. Lung Song nodded, then called over an adjutant beside him. He whispered a few words and someone immediately went to implement this matter. Just as Lung Song finished making the arrangements, Yang San spoke again. From today onwards, the dock will look the same as usual on the surface, but in fact, any personnel and goods entering or leaving the dock will need my permission to go out to sea. In order not to alert the enemy, you can make a move at sea. In short, the dock must be safe and sound. This matter will require Division Commander Lung's attention. As for the matters at sea, I will visit Division Commander Gao Xiong and explain it to him. Good. There are no problems on my side. I will personally arrange for people to guard here. Absolutely nothing will happen. Lung Song patted his chest and promised. Thank you for your hard work. Everyone do what you are supposed to do. Later, write down everything you know about Yang Taizhu and Qin Shuquan on a piece of paper and have someone send it to me. I want to know more about them. Yang San's businesslike face gave off a huge psychological pressure. After saying this, Yang San turned and walked over to Dong Hui and the other three. After arranging the external affairs, it was time to deal with the internal affairs of the Security Bureau. At this time, Dong Hui was no longer as lively as before. Instead, he had a face full of respect and worship. From Che Chao's mouth, he finally knew who he was facing just now. It was actually the boss of the Security Bureau. This made him excited but also a little afraid. He was excited because he had worshipped the bureau chief for a long time. Now that he could finally see his idol at such a close distance, his heartbeat had already sped up countless times. He was afraid because he had stopped the other party and even almost made a move on him. He didn't know what kind of punishment he would receive for doing something wrong. With these feelings of apprehension, Dong Hui knelt on the ground with a plop the moment Yang San strode into the duty room at the side of the dock. At this moment he only had one thought, and that was to do his best to make up for what he had done wrong. Yang San boldly sat down on a chair in the duty room. He looked at Dong Hui, who was kneeling on the floor and didn't even dare to raise his head, and said, I heard that you are Qin Shuquan's trusted aide. Have you ever participated in his matters? He thought that the director would reprimand him for his actions just now, but he didn't expect that the director was talking about something else. After a moment of hesitation, Dong Hui immediately shook his head and said, I'm from the Security Bureau. Usually, I only come into contact with Director Chen for work matters, such as guarding the docks and keeping an eye on all suspicious people. As for Director Chen's private affairs, I have no right to participate, nor will I participate. With just a few words, Dong Hui had already made his position clear. That was, he was only Qin Shuquan's subordinate. The reason why he was chosen as Qin Shuquan's confidant was because of his ability. As for personal friendship, there was really nothing to it. This was also one of the rules of the Security Bureau. There was only work between superiors and subordinates, and there was no personal relationship between them. This way, it was possible to avoid any feelings between the two parties and make them emotional during work. When Yang San heard Dong Hui's words, he nodded in satisfaction. He was not worried that this person would dare to lie to him. The internal rules of the Security Bureau were very strict. If he deceived his superior, it would be difficult for him to die even if he wanted to. Moreover, there were some things that he only needed to send someone to investigate and he could come to a conclusion. Dong Hui should know this. In this way, Dong Hui should not be involved in Qin Shuquan's affairs much. From this point of view, this person could still be used. If he performed well, it was not impossible to put him in an important position in the future. He thought that Che Chao was going to replace Qin Shuquan's position, but he was a newcomer and couldn't sort out many relationships for a while. If he had the help of a local snake like Dong Hui, then the progress of the work would definitely speed up. Yang San had an idea in his mind. When he looked at Dong Hui, who was kneeling on the ground, he was no longer as cold and ruthless as before when he spoke. Dong Hui, I believe what you just said for the time being, but you should also know that if you lie to me, what will the consequences be? Yes, your subordinate knows, so your subordinate will never dare to lie to the director. Dong Hui hurriedly kowtowed to the ground. At this moment, he just wanted to dig out his heart to show the director that he really didn't participate in some of Qin Shuquan's specific affairs. In fact, it was not that Dong Hui didn't want to, but that Qin Shuquan was being careful. Since it was a secret, of course, the fewer people who knew, the better. Besides, once the matter was known by his subordinates, if one of them contacted the headquarters and reported the matter to the director, wouldn't he be shooting himself in the foot? Yang San also thought about this problem, so he initially ruled out the possibility that Dong Hui was involved in the smuggling incident. Even if the other party didn't have this motive and condition, Yang San could say something openly. Very well, I hope you haven't participated. If so, your opportunity to make a contribution will come. To tell you the truth, this time, the director came in person to solve some of Qin Shuquan's personal problems. If there is no accident, he can no longer be competent for the position of the director of the Crimson City Security Bureau. There are still a lot of things to do next, and even the entire Crimson City Security Bureau will undergo a big reshuffle. If you perform well, you can still stay and be entrusted with important tasks. As for where to go, you can make your own choice. What choice was there? One was heaven, the other was hell. Dong Hui didn't even want to think about it more. He immediately said, "Director, please rest assured I will perform well and actively cooperate." Raise your head. Since he was going to continue to use Dong Hui, and in order not to alert the enemy and arouse Qin Shuchuan's suspicion, Yang San decided to add more weight to Dong Hui and give him a good reminder. Hearing this, Dong Hui raised his head and saw Yang San glaring at him. "Remember, if you dare to have any selfish motives or ruin things, I promise you that you will suffer a fate worse than death. Your family and relatives will suffer the same fate, understand?" "Understood, understood." Dong Hui was really frightened by this gaze, but after raising his head, he immediately lowered it again, trembling all over. After convincing Dong Hui, or putting enough pressure on him, Yang San walked out of the dock's duty room. He looked at Che Chao, who was guarding the door, and said, "There shouldn't be any problems with this person, but you still need to send someone to check on him. If you're sure there's no problem, use him well. He should be one of your capable assistants in the future." "Yes, Director," subordinate understands. Che Chao's expression didn't change, and then began to call people to investigate Dong Hui's situation. At the same time, he also wanted to interrogate the other 3 Security Bureau agents to get first-hand information. Yang San came to Crimson City. Although he was still discovered, he managed to salvage the situation in time. Furthermore, when he found Yang Wu, Lung Song happened to be there as well. With the help of the #1 person in the army, the matter of him arriving at the dock was suppressed. No one reported, and even the people guarding the dock were pressured by Yang San's power and chose to follow. As the director of Crimson City's Security Bureau, Qin Shuquan didn't know anything. He still did what he was supposed to do, preparing for another smuggling operation in 3 days. Yang Taizhu went to the palace more frequently these 2 days. Of course, with his status, he could not enter the inner palace. He could only meet his wife Lin Lin, who he spent a lot of effort to catch up with in the outer palace. He took the opportunity to get information from her, wanting to see if the palace was any different than usual. Since it was Yang Qindong's personal order, all the actions were naturally concealed. Not to mention that Lin Lin was only a servant girl that the 5th Madam fancied. Even the 5th Madam herself didn't know that Yang San came to Crimson City to investigate. After hugging Lin Lin tenderly for a while, Yang Taizhu left the palace with a satisfied face. He didn't find anything wrong, so he decided to do everything according to plan. He thought that after this matter was done, he would have a large sum of money. In the long run, his Yang family would be rich enough to rival a country. At that time, even if there was a possibility of the matter being exposed, he would just leave Crimson City. After he had enough money, even if he formed a team, building a country wouldn't be a problem. Yang Taizhu was sometimes a little arrogant. Since Yang Qindong could do it from scratch, why couldn't he do it with so much money? Nobles, generals, and ministers, it was better to have guts. Doing too much injustice leads to one's own destruction. This sentence was said by the ancients, and the truth also proved the authenticity and reliability of this sentence. 3 days later, when the time came to 9:30 p.m., when the docks began to return to silence, Director Qin Shuquan appeared on time. Just like the previous times when he smuggled goods, he still used the name of the Security Bureau, saying that he wanted to secretly transport a batch of goods out to sea. With this name, when he brought 60 to 70 carriages of goods all the way to the new docks, no one dared to check. The green light all the way let the goods be sent to the long-prepared cargo ship. While the goods were being loaded, Director Qin Shuquan took out a box of Aries brand cigarettes from his pocket. He took out a stick and put it in his mouth, then took out another stick and handed it to the head of the Security Bureau, Dong Hui. It had to be said that cigarettes could not only reduce stress and loneliness, but also play a strong role in communication. The cigarette was lit, and the relationship between Qin Shuquan and Dong Hui seemed to be a lot closer at this moment. Dong Hui, did anything happen at the docks during this time? When he said this, Qin Shuchuan's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could see through Dong Hui's heart. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.